Have you ever wondered what secrets the Earth still hides? Stories older than history itself. Welcome to Timeless Secrets, the channel where we explore the world's most mysterious artifacts and forgotten places. Please subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's begin. The Gunung Padang site, high in the misty hills of West Java, Indonesia, lies a place that has puzzled archaeologists, historians, and dreamers alike. To the casual traveler, it looks like nothing more than a quiet green hill, covered in grasses, shrubs, and scattered stones. But beneath this seemingly ordinary rise in the landscape may lie something extraordinary. A monument that challenges our very ideas of time, history, and what ancient humanity was capable of building. This is Gunung Padang, often called the Hill of Enlightenment, and sometimes, even more boldly, the world's oldest pyramid. Imagine arriving at dawn, the air heavy with dew, the sun beginning to spill across the slopes. A gentle hush hangs in the valleys, broken only by the call of distant birds and the faint rustle of leaves. You walk along a narrow path, following the uneven steps that climb toward the hilltop. At first it feels like a simple trek into nature, but then you begin to notice the stones. They are not random boulders, not accidental fragments. They are long basalt columns, many arranged carefully, as if placed by a human hand long ago. Some are stacked in terraces, others form patterns across the ground, as though echoing some forgotten blueprint. It is here, at this quiet hill in Java, that researchers believe an ancient secret might be buried. Not simply stones arranged by chance, but a vast, layered structure, older than any pyramid in Egypt, older even than Stonehenge. A monument possibly dating back not thousands, but tens of thousands of years. To understand the mystery of Gunung Padang, we must go back in time. The local people of the region have long known of the site. Legends tell of kings and spirits, of sacred places where the ancestors gathered. The very name Gunung Padang means mountain of light, or mountain of enlightenment. For generations, villagers climbed its slopes to leave offerings, to ask for blessings, to connect with forces greater than themselves. For them, the stones were not a puzzle of archaeology, but a living presence in their landscape. But in the early 20th century, and especially in the decades that followed, scholars began to take notice. They saw not just scattered rocks, but possible patterns, possible architecture. By the 1980s, Indonesian archaeologists officially recognized Gunung Padang as a megalithic site, the largest of its kind in all of Southeast Asia. The terraces were measured, mapped, and described, and still, questions grew. Why had so many stones been arranged here? Who had done it, and when? Standing on the summit, you see how the terraces step gently down the hill, each level lined with long, hexagonal stone columns. They look almost like the pipes of a great organ, laid flat and carefully aligned. Many weigh hundreds of kilograms. Moving them would not have been a casual task. The thought arises, what drove people to create such a place? A temple? A ceremonial platform? A gathering space beneath the sky? Then in the 21st century, a new wave of investigation began. With advances in ground-penetrating radar and seismic surveys, researchers began to peer beneath the surface. What they found suggested that Gunung Padang was far more than a hill crowned with stones. The data hinted at chambers, walls, and layers hidden underground. The hill itself, they argued, might not be natural at all, but a human-made pyramid, built in stages across thousands of years. One team proposed a staggering idea, that the deepest layers could date back as far as 20,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. If true, this would rewrite history. It would mean that long before Mesopotamia, before Egypt, before the great civilizations we learn about in school, there were people here in Java, capable of moving immense stones, shaping landscapes, and creating a monument that endured through millennia. Skeptics have been quick to raise objections. Mainstream archaeology is cautious. Many argue that while the surface terraces are undeniably arranged by humans, the hill beneath may still be largely natural. Dating techniques, they say, are complex and sometimes misleading. Organic materials buried within a structure might not reveal the true age of the construction itself. To claim that Gunung Padang is 20,000 years old, they warn, is to leap too far ahead of the evidence. And yet, the site remains tantalizing. Whether a hill with terraces or a buried pyramid, it exerts a magnetic pull. Visitors describe a sense of peace, of stillness, of connection. Local shamans and spiritual leaders sometimes speak of the hill as a place of power, where energies converge. Some even claim the stones hum or vibrate faintly at certain times, resonating with the earth itself. Walking slowly among the terraces, you notice how the stones are aligned. Many stand upright, their flat faces carefully oriented. Some clusters appear to form rectangles, others circles. Could they have been altars, stages, or markers for the stars? The air is filled with questions that have no clear answers. The silence of the hill is eloquent. It speaks without words. leaving you to wonder. Imagine the ancient builders here, thousands of years ago. Picture a group of people climbing the slopes, carrying tools, dragging stones with ropes and logs. They speak in a language lost to time, a tongue never written down. They sing as they work, perhaps, their voices carrying across the valley. They lift each basalt column and place it carefully, not randomly, but with meaning. Maybe they watch the skies, aligning stones with the rising sun, the setting moon, the bright path of the stars overhead. For them this is not just labor, it is ritual, devotion, a way to shape the world in harmony with the cosmos. Then time passes, generations come and go, the builders vanish, their stories forgotten, grass grows over the stones, trees take root, the hill begins to look natural again, its secret purpose buried beneath the soil. Until, thousands of years later, someone looks closer and asks, what if this hill is more than a hill? Gunung Padang's mystery lies not only in its stones, but in what it suggests about humanity. If it truly is as old as some claim, then the history of civilization is longer, stranger, and more complex than we ever imagined. If it is younger, a work of the last few thousand years, it still testifies to the creativity and determination of ancient people who left their mark in stone. In either case, it asks us to see the past, not as a straight line, but as a landscape filled with hidden peaks and forgotten valleys. As you sit upon one of the basalt columns at the summit, the view stretches out across the hills of West Java. The land is lush, green, fertile, a place where people have lived for countless generations. Below, villages cluster among rice paddies and winding rivers. Life goes on, ordinary and timeless, and above, the hill of Gunung Padang keeps its silence. Perhaps it is a pyramid, perhaps it is a hill crowned with terraces, perhaps it is both, nature and humanity, working together in ways we do not yet fully understand. What matters is the sense of wonder it inspires, the quiet realization that the earth holds secrets older than memory. As the day fades and the shadows lengthen, the stones glow faintly in the golden light. You imagine the voices of those who built this place, the rituals they performed, the hopes they carried into the future. They could not have known that one day, far away in time, others would climb their hill and wonder. And yet, perhaps that is exactly what they hoped, that their work would endure, that it would whisper across the ages, we were here, and we dreamed of eternity. And so the mystery of Gunung Padang remains. A hill, a pyramid, a monument lost in time. Its stones lie patient, waiting for us to listen, waiting for us to ask the questions, even if the answers never fully come. The Loughcrew Cairns. The hills of Ireland are never silent, not truly. Even when the winds fall still and the skies soften to a muted gray, there is always a murmur, as though the land itself is breathing. The rolling green, stitched with hedgerows and threaded with shadows, carries with it a memory so deep that one can feel it without words. It hums beneath the soles of your feet, and if you walk far enough, into the Midlands of County Meath, where the ridges rise gently yet commandingly, you will find a place where that hum grows stronger. A place where earth and stone have been married for millennia, where tombs were raised not for the dead alone, but for the stars, the sun, and for something unspoken that still lingers. This is Loughcrew. The cairns are scattered across a line of hills, like beads placed by a giant hand. They sit atop Llwcnecalia, the hill of the witch, and the name alone tells you something. For in Ireland, stories cling like mist, and every stone seems to demand a tale. They say the great hag goddess herself leapt across these ridges, dropping stones from her apron as she went. Where each fell, a cairn was born. That was the first memory, the mythic one, older than history, and yet still breathing in the soil. But myths, like stones, have many layers. Peel them back and you reach another kind of story. The story written by archaeologists, astronomers, and poets who have studied the cairns. They say these tombs were built around 5,000 years ago, in the Neolithic, by farming communities who shaped the land with both reverence and precision. They carried stones to the hilltops, carved them with spirals and lozenges and sunbursts, and aligned them so that light itself would visit them only on particular days of the year. Yet no matter how carefully one measures, there is always a part that resists explanation. Standing on those hills, you begin to feel that not everything was meant to be solved. The path to the cairns is not a straight road. You climb slowly, across grassy slopes, often slick with dew. Sheep wander freely here, cropping the ground, their bleating carried by the wind. The higher you go, the wider the land unfolds below. Patchwork fields, winding lanes, clusters of trees that look small from such a height. And then cresting the ridge, you begin to see them. Mounds of stone, rising softly from the earth, rounded like sleeping giants. At first they might appear as nothing more than heaps of rock, weathered and grass-grown. But as you draw near, the pattern reveals itself. Entrances open like mouths, narrow passages leading inward. The stones are not random, they are chosen, placed, measured. Here and there, One is carved with a symbol, a spiral, a wheel, a starburst, a cluster of lines that almost resemble rays of light. The tombs are not merely graves, they are calendars, observatories, doorways. Imagine the people who built them: farmers, herders, gatherers of grain and keepers of fire. They lived in wooden houses and thatched huts in the valleys below, but they brought their dead to the heights. They carried massive stones uphill, some weighing tons, without the wheel, without beasts of burden strong enough to do the work for them. It was human hands, human ropes, human determination. Why? Not merely for burial. There was something larger, something cosmic, woven into these mounds. Step closer to one cairn, and let your eyes trace the passage inward. It is narrow, just wide enough for a single body to pass. The air grows cool as you stoop inside, and the light fades behind you. The inner chamber, though, opens like a stone flower, a central space, roofed by great slabs corbelled one upon the other, so that they curve inward and meet high above your head. Around you, 3 recesses, side chambers where bones once lay, mingled with offerings of pottery, beads, perhaps food for the journey beyond, and on the stones, carvings, spirals that turn endlessly inward, circles that might be suns, diamond shapes, chevrons, a map of symbols whose meaning we can only guess. They are not written language, not as we would know it, but they are not decoration either. They are thought made stone. Now, pause in the center of that chamber, and wait, because the people who built it did not place it randomly. Twice each year, on the equinoxes of spring and autumn, the rising sun sends a beam of light through the narrow passage. It travels down the dark corridor, illuminating the carvings inside. For a brief moment, the sun itself enters the tomb, painting gold upon the gray, touching the symbols as though awakening them. And then, slowly, it withdraws. This was no accident. The alignment is too precise, too deliberate. Those who raised these stones understood the sky as intimately as they understood the earth. They marked the balance of day and night, the turn of seasons, the cycle of planting and harvest. To them the tomb was also a clock, a compass, a shrine, a place where time itself was honored. Outside, the wind whistles over the grass. The cairns stand in silence, as they have for thousands of years, their stones weathered but enduring. And yet if you place your hand upon them, you may feel something. Whether it is the cold damp of stone or the echo of all who came before, it is hard to tell. But it is there. Think of the countless dawns that have passed over this hill. Think of the generations who climbed here to bury their dead, to watch the equinox sunrise, to whisper prayers into the stone. The cairns are not ruins. Though time has touched them, they are still alive in their way, breathing with the rhythm of the land. And as you stand upon Llwcnakalia, the hill of the witch, you may begin to wonder whether myth and science are so far apart after all. The hag who leapt across the hills, dropping stones from her apron, was she not, in her way, another telling of the same truth? That these cairns came from beyond the ordinary, that they were gifts of power, meant to bind earth to sky. The stones do not answer, they simply endure, as they always have. The wind shifted across the slopes of Loughcrew, carrying with it the scent of heather and damp earth. As evening settled, the cairns seemed to change character once again. Their stones, so still in the sunlight, now glowed faintly under the soft wash of twilight. Shadows lengthened, sliding across the carvings, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if the spirals themselves moved, turning slowly, as though in response to the fading sun. Visitors who linger here at dusk often describe a silence unlike any other. It is not empty, nor heavy, but alive, like the hush of a breath held too long. The cairns seem to watch, patient and eternal, their chambers aligned to cycles far greater than a single human life. To step inside one of the tombs at this hour is to feel drawn backward, as though the air itself remembers. Perhaps this was the intent of those who raised these stones, to bind memory into place, to weave time into rock, so that each generation might stand here and feel the same awe, the same quiet wonder. Even now, when the stars rise above the hills and the cairns slip into darkness, they do not disappear. They remain, waiting, as they have for 5,000 years. Keepers of stories carved in stone, told only to those who take the time to listen. The Ggantija Temples. Under the Maltese sun, on the rugged island of Gozo, there stands a structure so old that time itself seems reluctant to measure it. The Ggantija Temples rise from the earth in worn tiers of limestone, their blocks weathered by millennia of wind and salt, their presence quiet yet immovable. Long before the pyramids of Egypt were ever conceived, before Stonehenge's stones were placed upright, the people of this island gathered these colossal rocks and fitted them together into something that endures to this day. The name Ggantija means belonging to the giants, a whisper of local legend that speaks to the impossibility of what is seen here. The stones are enormous, some weighing as much as 50 tons, and yet they were raised by hands with no metal tools, no beasts of burden, no wheels to roll them on. How they were moved, lifted, and stacked is a question that hangs in the warm Mediterranean air, unanswered even now. What remains is not simply a temple, but a mystery made solid, one that has endured for more than 500 years. As you walk among these stones, the air seems to shift. The ground is rough with fragments of limestone, cracked and pitted from the sea winds that sweep inland. The walls tower above, curving gently inward, as though to embrace those who step into the ancient sanctuary. Inside there are chambers branching outward, circular spaces connected by narrow passages. In the stillness of these inner spaces, it is easy to imagine the rituals that once filled them, voices chanting, fires flickering, the scent of offerings rising into the air. Archaeologists believe that the Ggantija temples were places of fertility rites, of ceremonies meant to bind life to the land. They have found figurines of broad-hipped women, statues carved with care, symbols of life and abundance. The soil of Malta is thin and stony, and for ancient farmers survival would have been precarious. Here, in the embrace of the temple walls, they may have sought to draw life from the earth, to coax fertility from a landscape that demanded respect. When the sun climbs high above Gozo, its light streams into the courtyards and chambers, casting shifting patterns across the ancient stones. These walls, though weathered, are not silent. They carry the touch of those who built them, a people whose names are lost, yet whose presence remains. Each block lifted into place was an act of will, an offering to the gods, or perhaps to time itself. The question of how they managed such feats of construction lingers. Without wheels, they may have used rolling logs or dragged stones over greased surfaces of clay. Others imagine sledges pulled by dozens of hands, inch by inch across the land. The blocks were quarried nearby, carved from the same limestone that makes up the cliffs of Gozo. Yet even so, the sheer size of them suggests a strength of community and vision that is difficult to fathom. The stones bear pockmarks, cut holes where ropes may have been tied, traces of the ingenuity required to move the unmovable. Standing at the entrance, one notices the threshold, a massive slab of stone, smoothed by the passage of countless feet over thousands of years. Beyond it, the chambers open like petals of a stone flower. Some walls still bear traces of plaster, once painted in bright colors. To stand here is to imagine not bare stone but living surfaces, bright with reds and ochres, murals alive with symbols whose meanings are lost. The temples would not have been the pale ruins we see today, but vibrant spaces alive with ritual and meaning. When night descends over Gozo, the wind gathers again, cool against the stones. In ancient times, firelight would have danced across the walls, shadows flickering among the carvings. The sound of drums, the low murmur of voices, and the rhythm of feet upon the earth would have filled these spaces. Perhaps prayers were whispered into the stones themselves, hopes and fears bound into the limestone that now stands in silence. The Ggantija temples are older than written language here, older than history itself. They are a message carved not in words but in stone. They speak of a people who looked at the land and the sky, at the cycles of growth and decay, and built a place where those forces could be honored. They speak of a desire to connect with something greater, to bring order to the unknowable vastness of life and death. Legends grew around these temples long after their builders were gone. The name of giants was given because no other explanation seemed possible. Stories tell of a giantess who carried the stones in her apron, building the temple while she nursed her child. Others imagine that the stones themselves rose by magic, placed by gods or forces beyond human strength. And in some ways, these stories are true, not in their details, but in their recognition that the builders were engaged in something extraordinary, something that remains beyond easy understanding. From the air, the layout of the Ggantija temples reveals itself as a pair of interconnected structures, side by side, each with its own chambers. Their curves mirror one another, like twin hearts carved into the landscape. The larger of the two temples stretches over 40 meters in length, its walls still rising several meters high. The smaller temple, though less imposing, carries the same careful craftsmanship, the same mystery. Together they form one of the most remarkable testaments to early human achievement anywhere in the world. In the centuries that followed their construction, the temples slowly fell into ruin. Roofs collapsed, stones tumbled, and the site was buried under earth and time. Farmers plowed fields nearby, shepherds moved their flocks past the silent mounds, unaware of the depth of history beneath their feet. Only in the last few centuries were the temples rediscovered, their stones lifted again to the attention of the world. Today visitors walk where ancient feet once trod, gazing in wonder at the work of hands long vanished. The mystery of their construction remains unsolved, but perhaps it is not the puzzle of logistics that matters most. Perhaps what endures is the sense of awe, the reminder that even without tools of iron or wheels of wood, humanity has always reached for the impossible. In every block of limestone lifted into place, there is a testament to vision, to unity, and to the human drive to shape the world in the image of belief. Now the Ggantija temples sit under the shifting sky of Malta, their stones warmed by the sun and cooled by the sea winds. They are a place of stillness, where time folds in on itself. Here, one can stand in the footsteps of people who lived thousands of years ago and feel the same earth beneath one's feet, touch the same stones, breathe the same air moving off the sea. The builders are gone, their names forgotten, their songs vanished, but the temples remain, vast and quiet, older than the pyramids, built by unknown means, and still holding within their walls the weight of mystery and wonder. The doorway dug into living rock. The highlands of northern Ethiopia rise like ancient guardians of the earth, their rugged peaks and deep valleys shaped not only by time, but by the hands of those who once carved mysteries into stone. Among these highlands, where the morning mist clings to cliffs, and where silence lingers like a second breath, there lies a story etched directly into the bedrock of the world. It is the story of a doorway, not built from blocks, not raised from rubble, but hewn from the very living rock itself. A passage that seems to lead nowhere, and yet holds within its frame the weight of centuries. Imagine approaching such a place. The air is dry, filled with the scent of dust, and faint traces of wild thyme carried on the wind. The land spreads in terraces of green and ochre, where farmers still guide their plows pulled by oxen, much as their ancestors did 1,000 years before. And then, beyond a low rise, the ground opens into stone, not in fragments, but as a continuous face of sheer rock. It is here that you see it, a doorway cut perfectly into the mountain wall, so precise in its lines, so deliberate in its form, that you wonder whether it was meant to be used by men, or by something larger, older, more enduring. The doorway seems almost impossible. It is neither ruin nor rubble, for nothing has fallen from it. The rock around it holds firm, unbroken. Instead, it appears as though a vast blade, guided by hands unknown, sliced into the cliffside to carve out the frame of an entrance. The lintel is flat and square. The sides run straight and even. There is no ornament, no carving, no image to tell you who cut it, or why, and yet its very simplicity is the source of its power. It is a doorway without a door, a passage without a destination, a question without an answer. Standing before it, one might notice that the air shifts subtly near the threshold. The heat of the sun falls differently there, as though absorbed by the stone in another manner. Shadows stretch deeper into the opening than reason suggests. You lean forward, peer inside, expecting to find a chamber, a tunnel, some path carved into the rock. Instead, you find only more stone, unbroken, as though the doorway was carved not to lead inward, but to mark a boundary between the world we know and something we cannot reach. In Ethiopia, such doorways are not isolated wonders. The land is scattered with rock-hewn marvels. The churches of Lalibela, for example, cut entirely out of single masses of stone, still stand as places of worship after 8 centuries. Entire cathedrals dug downwards into bedrock, roofs level with the earth, floors descending into shadow. Those who carved them left no scaffolds, no cranes, no mortar or bricks to study. They left only stone shaped by chisels and willpower, and faith strong enough to convince men to reshape mountains. The doorway in the cliffside, however, does not speak of worship. Its silence does not echo with prayers. It does not bear crosses, nor inscriptions in Ge'ez, the ancient script of the land. It remains stark, undecorated, almost mute, and yet for all its muteness, it whispers questions. What drove people to carve a door that opens onto nothing? Why labor so intensely to craft a frame for emptiness? Some say it was symbolic, a threshold not meant for human passage, but for the spirits of ancestors, or for gods who required no physical entrance to pass. Others wonder if it was a remnant of some greater project, a palace or sanctuary, never completed, a vision abandoned before stone could fully yield to its makers. And there are those who suggest it may have been older still, a relic of a forgotten culture whose methods and meanings were lost long before Ethiopia's present faiths and kingdoms took root. You might imagine the tools used to create such an opening, bronze chisels, or perhaps iron, driven again and again into the cliff until smooth lines emerged. Generations could have worked upon it, each chisel strike carrying forward the purpose of the last. Or perhaps some technique unknown to us was employed, something that allowed the stone to part more easily than it does beneath our modern drills. The evidence is silent. The rock gives no secrets, only the shape of the door. At sunrise, the doorway glows with light, its inner shadows briefly illuminated so that the stone surface within seems to ripple. At midday, the harsh sun flattens its appearance, making it seem almost like a painting rather than a passage. At night, when the stars sweep across the Ethiopian sky, the doorway becomes darker than the rock around it, a rectangle of deeper blackness, as if it were a window opening not onto another chamber, but onto the void itself. Travelers who come upon it often feel a pull, not a physical tug, but a quiet beckoning of the imagination. You find yourself wondering what would happen if you stepped through. Would your foot meet unbroken stone? Would the rock give way, reveal a chamber hidden within? Or would you find yourself transported elsewhere, beyond time and distance, into a place for which the doorway was truly built? The villagers nearby rarely speak of it at length. To them it is simply there, as it has always been. A part of the land, no more strange than the mountains that cradle their homes or the rivers that water their fields. Some say their grandparents told stories of spirits that guard the doorway. Others say it is a remnant of the time when the giants walked the earth, long before men. But for most it is not a place to linger. They pass it with respect, with quiet nods, perhaps with a prayer half-spoken, but they do not tarry in its shadow. The longer you look at the doorway, the more it seems to shift in scale. At times it appears almost human in size, as if a man could pass through with bowed head and careful step. At other times, it looms taller, as though it were cut for beings far greater in stature, beings whose heads would brush the lintel while their footsteps shook the earth. The ambiguity unsettles the mind, makes you question your own senses. Is it the doorway that shifts, or your perception of it? Stone carries memory in ways that words cannot. Each groove, each flat surface, each angle recalls the hand that struck it. Yet stone also erases memory, for it does not tell us the name of the mason, the language of his people, or the god to whom he dedicated his labor. It gives us only form, leaving us to supply the meaning. And so the doorway stands, a mute archive of effort and intention, its story forever unfinished. The landscape around it is rugged but alive. Wild grasses sway at the base of the cliff. Birds nest in crevices nearby, their calls echoing strangely against the stone. During the rainy season, water trickles down the face of the rock, tracing the edges of the doorway like veins of silver. The wetness darkens the stone, deepening its shadows, making the doorway seem all the more like an opening into another world. In the quiet of evening, when the sun has dropped behind the mountains, the air cools and stills. You might sit before the doorway, feeling the stone radiate the day's warmth. The silence grows dense, broken only by the faint hum of insects or the distant call of a hyena. In such moments, you begin to understand why places like this stir both fear and reverence. It is not simply a matter of craftsmanship. It is the sense that the stone itself participates in something larger, something beyond our brief lives. Whether it was meant for gods, for ancestors, or for purposes we cannot yet imagine, the doorway remains. It is neither ruin nor relic, for it was never complete. It is not a monument, for it carries no inscription. It is not a tomb, for it contains no dead. It is a question carved in stone, and like all the greatest questions, it resists every answer. And so, in the Ethiopian highlands, amid the cliffs and valleys, there endures this opening into silence. Year after year, century after century, it waits. The wind touches its edges, the rain smooths its face, the sun strikes it from dawn to dusk, and still it waits. For what? We cannot know. For whom? We cannot say. Yet the doorway dug into living rock remains, steadfast, mysterious, and unyielding, a passage forever leading somewhere just beyond reach. The Lapedo Child, a hybrid skeleton lost to time. Beneath the sloping hills of Portugal, there is a narrow valley carved by the flow of water long since stilled. The land holds a softness here, a hush, as if it remembers something ancient and prefers not to speak of it too loudly. Among the scrub and the stone, one can almost hear the faint echo of footsteps that walked this land tens of thousands of years ago. It was in this quiet place, in a shallow limestone shelter called Ggantija, that the remains of a child were found, remains so unusual, so strange, that they seem to belong not entirely to one world or another. The child has come to be called the Lapedo Child, a hybrid of sorts, a skeleton lost to time, carrying in its bones the story of two human worlds meeting. The discovery was accidental, as so many revelations of deep history often are. Archaeologists working in the late winter of 1998 stumbled across a small grave cut into the earth beneath layers of sediment. Within it, carefully laid out, were the bones of a young child, only about 4 years old. Around the fragile skeleton, the people of the past had left traces of care and ceremony. Ochre dust had been sprinkled across the small body, staining the earth with its iron-red hue, a color long associated with blood, with life, and with rebirth. Fragments of animal bones and pierced shells hinted at adornments, offerings, or perhaps tokens of protection for the journey beyond life. The burial spoke not of neglect or accident, but of deliberate intention. Whoever this child was, they had mattered. Yet it was not the grave goods alone that caught attention, but the child's very form. The bones, though delicate, held contradictions. The face was more modern, resembling that of our own kind, Homo sapiens, yet the body bore traits older, heavier, more robust features reminiscent of Neanderthals. The proportions were strange. The limbs longer and slender, like those of modern humans, yet the build suggested strength beyond what might be expected of such a small frame. To those who examined the skeleton, it seemed to whisper of two lineages meeting in a single child, a fusion of worlds once thought separate. The Lapedo Child rests at the intersection of a great story in human history, the meeting of Neanderthals and early modern humans on the Iberian Peninsula. For so long it was believed that Neanderthals had vanished abruptly, displaced or destroyed by the arrival of our species. Yet here, in this shallow grave, was a different story, a child that could not belong to one or the other, but instead to both. The valley itself seems to cradle this story in silence. The limestone cliffs of Ggantija rise like broken walls, their surfaces weathered by rain and sun, their colors shifting between pale cream and shadowed gray. Small caves and rock shelters dot the escarpment, places where ancient people might have sought refuge from wind and storm. The air carries the sharp scent of thyme and wild herbs, and birds call across the emptiness. It is a landscape both wild and quiet, a fitting stage for secrets buried in earth. When the grave was first unearthed, it was as though time cracked open. Archaeologists bent low, brushing away soil with the gentlest touch, as if afraid to disturb the child's rest. Each layer revealed more, a small arm curled, a jaw tilted, ochre powder clinging to ribs and skull. The ochre, though faded, still glowed faintly against the pale limestone dust, as if it had been freshly scattered. Thousands of years had passed, yet the care placed into the burial was still present, still visible. It was as if those who had laid the child to rest had reached across ages to speak to the living. The bones told stories beyond what the eye could see. Analysis revealed a blend of traits that defied the tidy categories once drawn by science. The skull was rounded, modern in its shape, yet the jaw was more robust, the chin less pronounced. The pelvis carried hints of the wider, sturdier build of Neanderthals, while the arms and legs reached with the longer, finer lines of modern humans. It was as though two branches of humanity, grown apart over millennia, had met here in this small valley, and entwined. What life might this child have known? The Lapedo Child lived around 24,000 years ago, in a world both colder and harsher than ours. Glaciers lay heavy across much of Europe, and the air held the chill of an ice age that dictated where people could live and where they could not. In Portugal, the climate was somewhat gentler, the valleys offering shelter, rivers carrying fish, forests home to red deer, wild horses, and the swift shadows of predators. People would have lived in small groups, moving with the seasons, gathering what they could, hunting when they must. Fires would have burned bright against the dark, crackling warmth into nights otherwise ruled by cold and silence. The child may have played among rocks and scrub, chasing after older siblings or watching the careful shaping of tools from stone. Perhaps they listened to the low murmur of stories told by firelight, tales of the hunt, of ancestors, of spirits beyond sight. The ochre in the grave suggests ritual, belief, a sense that death was not an end but a passage. The people of this time, though without writing, carried in their minds rich worlds of meaning, and in the child's burial we glimpse their tenderness, their grief, their care. And yet the Lapedo Child was not only a symbol of loss but of connection. In its bones lies evidence of a truth that science long resisted. Modern humans and Neanderthals were not strangers passing in the night. They met, they mingled, they shared lives, and they created children whose bodies carried the blended legacy of two lineages. The grave at Ggantija whispers of families that did not see difference as boundary, but as bridge. For centuries, Neanderthals were painted as brutish, less than human, incapable of culture or care. Yet here, in the ochre and the careful placement of grave goods, we see evidence of ritual and tenderness that both Neanderthals and modern humans shared. The child's mixed features suggest that boundaries between them blurred more often than once imagined. In this valley, the lines of separation fade, replaced by kinship and continuity. The ochre itself lingers in the mind. Why scatter the earth with red dust, unless to mark something sacred? In burials across continents, from Africa to Europe, ochre has appeared again and again, a thread of meaning that ties cultures separated by space and time. It speaks of a human instinct to color death with life, to paint the departure with echoes of blood and renewal. That this small child was dusted with such pigment suggests love, grief, and an attempt to grant dignity to loss. As night falls over the valley, one can almost imagine the ancient people gathered around the grave, firelight flickering across solemn faces, the body laid gently into earth, ochre cast like blessing, shells perhaps tied as adornment, fragments of deer bone placed as offerings. A hush would have fallen as soil covered the small frame, as if all sound itself honored the passing. And then, silence, save for the wind through scrub and the faint murmur of fire fading. The Lapedo Child remains one of the most haunting discoveries of Europe's Ice Age past, for in those fragile bones lies a question that echoes still. What does it mean to be human? Is it bloodline? Is it form? Is it the rituals of care and love, shown in the face of death? This child, neither wholly modern nor wholly Neanderthal, seems to suggest that humanity is not bound by divisions but enriched by unions. Even now, the skeleton stirs debate. Some argue it as proof of hybridization, of two species merging. Others caution that the traits may simply be variation within modern humans of the time. Yet whatever the precise science, the image lingers, a child buried with care, a child that carried in its bones the memory of more than one lineage. The valley of Lapedo still holds its silence. The limestone cliffs rise unchanged, the scrub still scents the air, the birds still call across the emptiness. Beneath its soil, traces of ochre may still sleep, the earth carrying the faint memory of hands that once scattered it with love, and somewhere, in the imagination, the Lapedo child rests. Not merely as bones, but as story, as bridge, as reminder of a time when humanity was more than one shape, more than one voice, yet still one people. The Inga Stone, an ancient wall of messages, no one deciphers. Beneath the bright skies of northeastern Brazil, where the land bends into a rugged valley carved by the slow persistence of water and stone, there lies something both heavy and strangely weightless, the Inga Stone. At first glance, it is simply a wall of rock, a weathered surface exposed to the sun for countless centuries. Yet as you draw closer, as your eyes begin to adjust, not just to its presence but to its peculiar skin, you see the truth. It is no ordinary stone. Its face is filled, edge to edge, with symbols, spirals, stars, curling snakes, wheels with spokes, strange humanoid shapes that seem neither quite human nor quite animal. An entire surface devoted to a language no one alive can read. Imagine yourself walking there slowly, as though on a path that has no rush, each step pressed into dust that has been dust for far longer than memory. The sound of cicadas buzzes faintly in the background. Heat presses gently on your shoulders, not unkind, but steady and insistent. Ahead, the Inga Stone gleams in the light, its markings catching faint shadows in their grooves. It is not tall like a temple wall, nor hidden in the earth like a tomb. It simply rests where it has always rested. A river once flowing against its side, carving and shaping, until humans, long before written history in the region, placed their own marks across its broad back. You step closer, your fingertips hover above the stone's carvings, not daring to touch. The grooves are deep, precise, and yet flowing, as though the hand that made them understood both geometry and dream. One spiral curls outward and outward again, so steady it seems, as though it might keep growing even now. Beside it, a set of lines cross at sharp right angles, suggesting order, a structure, something planned. Above them, a circle dotted with tiny indentations. Was it the sun, or perhaps the night sky? Some claim it is a map of constellations. Others insist it is simply art, born from the hand of one who felt the need to carve meaning into stone, and yet, no one agrees. Archaeologists have puzzled over this wall for generations. To some, it is the legacy of a forgotten culture, one that preceded the known peoples of Brazil, carrying with it knowledge that slipped away long before Europeans arrived. To others, it is an echo of shamanic visions, patterns seen in trance and ritual, captured here in stone not for explanation, but for memory. And to the dreamers, the poets, the seekers of mystery, it might be something else entirely. They whisper of lost continents, of star maps from visitors not of this earth, of languages too old for us to even recognize as language. The Inga Stone does not answer. The stone simply rests. Its grooves do not move, but they hold the eyes captive. You notice how some of them repeat. Certain spirals return again. Certain geometric arrangements seem to echo across the wall. Could it be a code, written in a way we simply have not learned to read? Or perhaps it is more like music, repeating themes, refrains and rhythms meant not for the ear but for the mind. Imagine if the wall itself were a kind of score, a song to be sung by the wind. Now picture the ancient people who might have stood here, tools in hand. What did they think as they pressed into the rock, cutting away centuries of resistance to leave behind these grooves? Was it done in silence, each mark part of a ritual, or did laughter echo, children running nearby, the community gathering food along the river as the carver slowly etched the stone? Did they believe they were speaking to the gods? Or perhaps to the future, to us? The landscape around the Inga Stone is harsh and beautiful, shaped by time into ridges and valleys. When the rains come, water moves with force, washing the stone clean, feeding the plants, filling the air with the scent of earth and growth. In dry seasons, silence settles, and dust gathers at its base. Through both, the carvings endure. Imagine centuries of storms, of suns rising and setting, of generations passing, while the symbols remained fixed, unchanged, waiting for eyes that might finally understand them. Some researchers say the symbols resemble astronomical charts. One spiral in particular, they argue, aligns with the motion of certain stars. If true, this would mean the carvers were not only artists but observers of the heavens. Standing in the quiet valley, you tilt your head back, and even in imagination you can see what they may have seen. Endless constellations wheeling overhead, stars crisp against the blackness of night. For people with no written language, no books or clocks, the sky itself was a library. Perhaps the Inga stone was their attempt to copy down its pages. Others see rivers instead of stars, claiming the spirals mark the paths of water, the lifeblood of their land. Each curl, each line, a flowing reminder of where the world gives and where it takes. Water was always both friend and threat, bringing nourishment, yet carving away at the edges of homes. To record its patterns was to record survival itself, and still others whisper of myth. They see not stars nor rivers, but spirits and stories. One carving, resembling a snake, might recall the great serpents of creation myth. Another, shaped like a human with outstretched arms, could be a hero or a god. When words are not written, images bear the weight of story. Perhaps this was their book, their epic, laid not on paper, but on stone. You trace the carving slowly with your eyes, moving from one figure to the next, and in the silence of your own mind, you almost hear voices, not words you understand, but the murmur of meaning that refuses to fade. Something was said here, something has been waiting. The Inga stone has no borders. No one knows how far its carvings extend beneath the earth, nor how many more may once have existed before erosion took them. It is a fragment of a larger work we may never fully recover, and yet, even this fragment is immense. Over 150 square meters of carvings spread across its surface. Some so faint, they nearly vanish, others still sharp as though cut yesterday. Standing before it, you feel the weight of time. Not the time you measure in years or centuries, but the deeper time of human persistence. Whoever carved these symbols is gone, their villages vanished, their names forgotten. And yet, through this stone they remain, their hands move still, invisible, guiding your eyes from spiral to spiral, line to line. The stone is their voice, though its words remain hidden. There is a certain peace in that, a reminder that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant simply to be witnessed, to be carried quietly in the mind, the way you carry the memory of a song long after it has ended. And so, as the shadows lengthen and the cicadas hum, you sit quietly near the Inga stone. You let your eyes soften. You do not demand answers, you simply exist beside it, as countless others must have. Each generation leaving no trace but their gaze. The spirals seem to turn gently in the fading light. The grooves hold their silence, and for a moment you understand, the mystery itself is the gift. The Golan Venus, a figurine from before civilization. The highlands of the Golan are a land of shifting skies. The winds travel over basalt ridges, across wide plateaus, through valleys carved by water long since dried, and they carry with them a silence that feels older than language. Here the earth is dark and volcanic, heavy with rock that cooled from fire thousands upon thousands of years ago. And here, in this quiet and stony landscape, a single object was uncovered that whispers of a world so ancient it slips beyond what we normally call history. It is small, no larger than a hand could hold comfortably. A figurine, carved from basalt itself, shaped in the form of a woman. Archaeologists call it the Golan Venus. But that name, Venus, is only a convenient title, borrowed from the famous Paleolithic Venus figurines, scattered across Eurasia. Whoever carved this figurine, some 12,000 years ago or more, did not call it that. They left no words, no alphabet, no inscription, only stone, shaped with purpose, smoothed with care, left to last long after every memory of its maker had faded. The Golan Venus was found in a place where settled life was only just beginning to take form. The world was on the cusp of transformation. Hunters and gatherers still roamed the lands, but the first glimmers of agriculture were emerging. The Fertile Crescent was stirring with experiments in planting, harvesting, and keeping animals. Communities, still fragile and small, were experimenting with permanence, building structures of stone and wood that would tether them to one place longer than their ancestors had ever lingered. The figurine belongs to this threshold, neither purely Paleolithic nor fully Neolithic. It is from that uncertain time when humanity was learning how to live together, how to stay, how to endure the seasons. And so it becomes more than an artifact of art. It is a witness to change. When we picture it, we must slow ourselves down. The figurine is modest. There is no intricate ornamentation, no delicate etching. It is simple, almost abstract. The head is not finely detailed. The body, though suggestive of the feminine form, is not elaborate, and yet the simplicity is its language. Like a whisper instead of a shout, it draws attention to the silhouette, the essence, the presence of the human form captured in stone. What was it for? That question sits at the heart of the figurine. Was it a charm for fertility, a household guardian, a symbol of clan identity, an object of ritual or teaching? No one can say, but perhaps the ambiguity is what makes it powerful. It refuses to be defined by modern categories, just as it escaped the categories of its time. The land around where it was found, in the southern Golan, is one of paradoxes. Summers can be fierce, with dry heat burning across the stones. Winters bring rain, sometimes snow, covering the basalt fields in frost. Between these extremes, life ekes out a living wild grasses, hardy shrubs, herds of gazelle once roaming freely, birds tracing the skies on their migratory routes. To live here in the time of the Golan Venus would have meant adapting to every shift of season, every uncertainty of weather. A figurine carved and kept may have been a way to anchor meaning, to give continuity in a shifting world. Imagine for a moment the person who carved it. They sit on a flat stone, a smaller basalt piece in hand, chipping away. The work is slow. Basalt is not soft, it resists shaping. Each strike must be chosen, deliberate, carried with patience. Hours stretch, days perhaps. In the pauses they may have glanced up at the sky, watched the play of light across the hills, listened to the distant calls of animals. The act of carving was itself a kind of dialogue with time. Stone meeting human persistence, human vision meeting the stubborn hardness of earth. What drove them? Was it the desire to create something lasting, or something to serve immediately, in ritual or custom? Did they know that the figurine would outlive them, or was it simply part of the rhythm of life, no more remarkable than shaping a tool or fashioning a vessel? The Golan Venus is often compared to the older Paleolithic Venus figurines of Europe, those of Willendorf, Holyfels, Lespug, and others. Those figurines carved of ivory, limestone, or bone often emphasized fertility, with exaggerated forms, wide hips, full breasts, rounded bellies. The Golan Venus is different. It is more abstract, more restrained, almost schematic. Where the Willendorf Venus radiates abundance, the Golan Venus seems more austere. This difference may reflect a different worldview, a different cultural purpose. It may also reflect the transitional time in which it was made, a time not of endless hunting grounds, but of early villages, measured harvests, fragile continuity. Some scholars suggest it may have been used in household rituals, prayers for successful crops, healthy children, protection against disease. Others propose it could have served as a kind of communal emblem, a token held by a group to embody their unity. Or perhaps more simply, it was a private object, a thing carried by one individual for reasons we cannot fully recover. The power of such figurines lies in their refusal to be pinned down. They invite speculation, but they also remind us that not everything was made to be explained. Some things were made to be lived with. The basalt itself is telling. Basalt is born of fire, the result of volcanic eruptions that shaped the Golan. To carve from it is to take fire's hardened memory and give it a new shape. It resists wear, it lasts. Unlike wood or clay, it does not crumble easily. Whoever made the figurine chose a medium that would survive across ages. Was that intentional, or was it simply the material at hand, abundant in the environment? Either way, it ensured that their gesture would echo into our own age. When it was unearthed by archaeologists, it did not shout its significance. It was a quiet find, a small piece among larger excavations of early dwellings, hearths, grinding stones, and flint tools. But as the figurine was lifted into light again, it began to tell a subtler story. It reminded us that even in the earliest settlements, art and symbol mattered as much as survival, that people, no matter how ancient, sought to express meaning beyond the immediate. If you close your eyes, you can imagine the settlement where it once stood. Small huts, or shelters, perhaps built of wood, reeds, and stone, fires flickering at night, smoke rising into the cold air, the sounds of grinding seeds, the smell of cooking meat, the cries of children, the steady rhythm of daily labor. And in that space, a figurine kept on a flat rock, or tucked into a pouch, or passed from hand to hand. Its presence, quiet, steady, part of the fabric of life. One can almost hear the murmur of conversations in a language no longer spoken, words that never reached writing, cadences lost but echoes still carried in the silence of the hills. Those voices are gone, but the figurine remains, bearing witness in its mute way. The Golan Venus is dated to roughly 12,000 years ago, placing it at the very dawn of the Neolithic. This was the Natufian culture, a people who lived in the Levant during this time of transition. The Natufians were among the first to experiment with sedentary life, to build stone houses, to bury their dead in cemeteries, to harvest wild cereals, to store food. They were on the edge of becoming the world's first farmers. The figurine fits into this context. It belongs to a society learning how to stay, how to build continuity. Its abstractness may reflect new ways of thinking, new symbols for a new world. The Natufians are often described as the threshold people. They still hunted gazelle, fished rivers, gathered wild plants. but they also laid the foundations of agriculture. They still carried stone tools, but they also made art that spoke of permanence. Their settlements, though modest, foreshadowed the villages and cities to come. The Golan Venus, then, can be seen as part of that threshold identity. It is an artifact of a people in between movement and settlement, between foraging and farming, between old ways and new. The figurine's form is so spare that it almost becomes universal. Without details of face or ornament, it could belong to anyone. It becomes a shape in which all can see themselves, or their mothers, or their ancestors. That universality may have been intentional, a symbol not of an individual, but of humanity itself, distilled to its essence. When we gaze at it today, we bring our own imaginations. We see it through modern eyes, with modern categories. But part of the task of engaging with such an artifact is to try, however imperfectly, to set aside our frameworks and allow it to speak in its own silence, to sit with it as it is, a small stone figure, simple, enduring, mysterious. The museum glass that now protects it cannot erase the fact that once it lived in someone's hand, someone's dwelling, someone's world. It was not made for us, and yet, across 12 millennia, it reaches us. The Golan Venus reminds us that humanity has always carried symbols. Long before writing, before temples, before kings, before books, people carved and shaped and carried figures that gave meaning to their lives. They may not have called it art. They may not have distinguished between utility and symbolism as we do. To them it was simply part of being human. When you think of this figurine, think of the deep patience of its maker. Think of the quiet strength of stone, meeting the vision of a person who wished to see form emerge. Think of the countless generations between then and now, and how so few objects travel such distances of time. The winds of the Golan still sweep across the plateau, moving over rocks, grasses, scattered ruins. Shepherds still walk with their flocks. Farmers still till the soil, and beneath it all the basalt waits, holding within it fragments of lives long gone. The figurine is one such fragment, lifted out of silence to remind us of who we are and how long we have been walking this earth. The Golan Venus, a small stone figure from before civilization, carrying the weight of humanity's oldest dreams. The Moa bones of New Zealand, remains of a bird too recently gone. The earth remembers things in silence. Beneath soil, beneath layers of damp clay, beneath streams that curve across valleys, there are stories pressed down into darkness. Sometimes they belong to creatures long extinguished, who left no written word, no tools, no monuments, only bone. Among those quiet records are the remains of the moa, the great flightless birds of New Zealand, whose shadows once covered the land, whose footsteps thundered over fern-lined ground, and whose absence today still feels strangely recent. If you walk the lowlands of New Zealand with patience, you may stumble across their memory. The soil hides ivory curves, femurs like timber beams, sternums wide enough to seem like shields. They rest in swamps, in caves, in riverbeds where they toppled and sank. The people who uncovered them centuries later could hardly believe that such immense beings had lived in their own islands, so near in time, so close to human touch. The moa were giants in every sense. Some species rose over 3 meters tall when stretching their necks. Others were smaller, delicate, weaving through forests like deer, yet all shared the same design, wingless, feathered bodies balanced on strong legs, with a head poised on a long neck, curious and calm. Their beaks cropped shrubs, grasses, leaves, their gizzards ground stones to aid digestion. They were herbivores, peaceful, shaped by an ecosystem where mammals never arrived, where birds ruled without rivals. The land of New Zealand, isolated for millions of years, became their kingdom. In the absence of four-legged grazers, moa took their place. Where deer would have wandered in Europe, where antelope skimmed the African savanna, moa ranged the forests and plains of Aotearoa. They browsed alpine plants high on mountain slopes, and they bent low to forage in shadowy valleys. Their lives stretched across niches that elsewhere in the world belonged to an entire range of mammals. Imagine the sound. In early dawn, when mist touched the fern trees, a low rustle of feathers, the slow crunch of twigs beneath enormous weight, perhaps a soft booming call, echoing, deep as a drum, reverberating through the cold air. These were not predators, not hunters, but their very size commanded space. A lone human standing near would have felt dwarfed, like a child beside moving pillars of life. The moa lived not in ancient geological time, but in an almost tangible past. When Polynesian voyagers arrived in New Zealand around the 13th century, the birds still roamed in multitudes. These navigators, ancestors of today's Maori, found a land of abundance. The great birds had never known fear of humans. They did not flee, for they had never learned to. Without natural predators, they were vulnerable in a way both tragic and inevitable. Bones tell the story with clarity. They lie in heaps, sometimes scattered by rushing rivers, sometimes whole skeletons preserved in caves where they fell. Their structure reveals lives of slow grazing, of steady rhythms, The leg bones are dense, built to carry immense weight. The sternum lacks the keel where flight muscles would have anchored, proof of their grounded existence. Some skeletons show signs of butchery, cut marks, breaks made by stone tools, silent testimony to encounters with early hunters. To speak of extinction is often to think of distant epochs. Dinosaurs, trilobites, mammoths, they belong to far-off ages, but the moa's disappearance is a wound, fresh in geological time. Within just a few centuries of human arrival, every species of moa was gone. The birds, once numbering in millions, dwindled rapidly under hunting and habitat burning. Their eggs, large and fragile, were taken for food. Their flesh was roasted. Their bones, sometimes fashioned into tools, sometimes discarded, sank into middens and earth. By the 15th century they were no more, too recently gone. That is what makes the moa's story linger. They did not vanish in prehistory. They were extinguished in the memory of cultures still living. Oral traditions recall giant birds, creatures of size beyond belief. Legends speak of hunting parties, of feasts, of awe at their immensity. The absence of moa is not an ancient mystery, but a silence that began just yesterday, in the scale of Earth's time. The bones themselves carry atmosphere. Step into a museum in Christchurch, Dunedin, or Wellington, and you may see them assembled, towering skeletons, reconstructed with reverence. They rise over visitors, motionless guardians of a lost world. Their hollow sockets seem to search the air. Their ribs curve like the hull of a canoe. Some skulls are small compared to the body, almost delicate, with narrow beaks shaped for browsing shrubs. The contrast of bulk and fragility strikes the eye. Archaeological discoveries deepen the mystery of presence and absence. In caves such as those at Pyramid Valley, entire assemblages of bones lie tangled, thousands upon thousands of individuals preserved in mud. The site was once a swamp. Birds wandered in and became trapped. Over centuries their remains piled. A graveyard of giants. Excavators in the 20th century uncovered them with care, brushing mud from bones that seemed impossibly intact. The valley whispered of abundance, of a time when flocks moved like slow rivers across the land. And yet, alongside these remains, artifacts appear. Charcoal from ancient fires, tools chipped from stone, evidence that humans and moa lived side by side, however briefly. The collision of worlds, one shaped by birds that knew no fear, the other by people skilled in navigation and survival, ended swiftly. In this, the moa joined the ranks of creatures undone by human arrival. The dodo of Mauritius, the great auk of the North Atlantic, the giant lemurs of Madagascar. Each vanished within centuries of contact. But moa are different. Their sheer scale makes their nearness uncanny. They are not small curiosities but titans whose loss reshaped an ecosystem. In their absence, forests changed. Plants that had relied on their browsing grew unchecked or withered without seed dispersal. The balance shifted, new dynamics forming in silence. The land itself adjusted to a void. Some bones are stained dark from the tannins of swamps, some pale as driftwood, some still holding traces of collagen. Scientists study them with reverence, extracting DNA strands that cling to marrow. These fragments tell of lineages, of branching species across New Zealand's islands. 11 kinds of moa once existed, from the giant Dinornis to the smaller bush and upland varieties. Each filled its own ecological space, together weaving a tapestry of avian life, unlike anywhere else on Earth. DNA also reveals closeness to another survivor, the kiwi, small, shy, nocturnal, still walking the forests of New Zealand. In the kiwi, one hears the echo of moa, a faint continuation of a lineage otherwise cut short. To see a kiwi today is to glimpse a ghostly shadow of what once was immense. The cultural memory endures. In Maori tradition, the moa linger as figures of myth and warning. Their feathers, rare and sacred, appear in tales. Their bones, sometimes worked into fishhooks or ornaments, remain links between ancestors and a vanished world. Songs recall the hunts, the feasts, the astonishment of encountering birds taller than men. These memories are not distant. They live in language, in story, in the way landscapes are named. There is melancholy in walking a land that once shook with the weight of beings now absent. Hills that once held moa browsing are quiet. The rivers that carried their bones now run clear. The caves that swallowed them hold only dust and echoes. And yet, in these places, one can almost feel the shadow of feathers brushing past, the slow shift of weight on the earth, the hush of something immense moving through the undergrowth. The moa bones remind us not of impossibly ancient worlds but of the nearness of loss. They tell us how quickly abundance can unravel, how swiftly silence can fall. They ask us to imagine mornings when the land was still alive with giants, and to recognize that their absence is our inheritance, and so the bones remain. In museum cases, in swamp mud, in cave darkness, they remain as question and answer, as warning and wonder. They remain to remind us that not all giants vanished in the age of dinosaurs. Some walked beside us, too recently gone, leaving only hollow sockets to watch us from beyond time. The Moa are gone, but the earth remembers. The Al-Nasim tablet, stars burned into stone. Beneath the winds that sweep the Mesopotamian plain, where the land lies flat, and the horizon stretches without end, there rests a story that was never meant to be hurried. It begins with a single object, quiet, unassuming, and yet impossible to ignore once it is placed in the hand. The Al-Nasim tablet, as it came to be called, is no larger than the breadth of 2 palms, a slab of stone smoothed not by nature but by deliberate care, its surface etched with patterns so fine that, at first glance, one might mistake them for the random scratches of erosion. But when traced with the fingers, or examined under the glancing light of a flame, the marks resolve into shapes that feel at once familiar and unknowable. The tablet was not found by scholars at first, nor by kings or generals who once ruled these lands. It was uncovered in silence, by the hands of a shepherd who had no word for archaeology. In the late season, when the sheep moved over dry ground, his heel struck against stone. He bent, expecting perhaps a shard of pottery, as is so often found where ancient cities once stood. Instead, he lifted something that caught the low sunlight strangely, a square of stone, its face covered in tiny punctures and intersecting lines, each one made with patience so long ago that dust had gathered in the grooves like the threads of a forgotten weaving. The shepherd, with no use for stars carved in stone, carried it home. And it was there, resting by the hearth in his modest dwelling, that a wandering antiquities trader noticed it. The trader had seen many relics, broken cylinder seals, beads of lapis lazuli, fragments of clay tablets pressed with cuneiform. But this was different. There were no words on its surface, no gods or kings, no tally of harvests. Instead, there was an arrangement that whispered of the sky. When scholars first examined it, they called it perplexing. The punctures did not fall in neat rows like writing, nor did they cluster like decoration. Some seemed to gather into constellations, still recognizable, the hunter, the bull, the lion of summer. Others strayed, falling into positions that did not match any known pattern. It was as though the stars had been copied, but with alterations, or perhaps as they appeared in another age. The Al-Nasim tablet soon became a quiet obsession among those who study the origins of the heavens. For here, they thought, was evidence that people in Mesopotamia had not only watched the skies but recorded them in stone, and not in the fleeting clay of everyday record-keeping, but in something meant to endure. Stone is not chosen lightly. To carve into it requires more effort than pressing a reed into clay. It demands a reason. Why then would someone thousands of years ago labor to carve stars into rock? One answer begins with time itself. In ancient Mesopotamia, the sky was not distant. It was the map by which lives were measured. Farmers turned their eyes upward to know when the rivers would swell, when to sow, when to harvest. Priests studied the heavens to interpret omens, seeing in the movement of stars the fates of kings and the rise of empires. Shepherds guided their flocks beneath constellations, learning the slow clockwork of night. To capture the stars upon stone might have been an attempt to hold still the shifting calendar of heaven, to fix in permanence what the eye could see only for a moment. But the tablet defies simplicity. Not all the marks align with familiar constellations. Some scholars wonder if the engraver was attempting to record an event, a comet, perhaps, or a shower of meteors that blazed across the night sky. Others argue it may represent the positions of stars at a time so remote that the heavens themselves have shifted since. Precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, changes the sky subtly over millennia. If the Al-Nasim tablet records such a sky, then it may be far older than first assumed. And so in long halls where the object now rests behind glass, debates linger like whispers. One expert insists it is an early star chart. Another claims it is ritual, a talisman binding heaven to earth. A third suggests it is nothing more than decoration, the idle work of hands that loved patterns but not meaning. Yet the weight of the stone resists dismissal. To hold it is to feel intent. Imagine the hands that carved it, not hurried, not careless, each indentation pressed with deliberation, as though copying from the night sky itself. One can picture the artisan seated upon cool stone, looking upward as dusk fell. Around him, the air of Mesopotamia thick with the smell of earth and water, the slow dimming of the day revealing pinpoints of light above, perhaps a small flame beside him, flickering against the tablet's surface as he worked, the tapping of a tool against stone echoing softly in the night. The Al-Nasim tablet invites such images because it refuses to explain itself. It is at once precise and ambiguous, too careful to be meaningless, too mysterious to be certain. It carries within it the same allure as the stars themselves, a sense of order hidden just beyond reach. And so it lingers, both artifact and riddle. Visitors come, drawn not only to its age, but to the quiet intimacy of its subject. For while kings and battles fill the records of history, here is something else, an ancient gaze fixed upon the heavens, and a desire to preserve what was seen. It reminds us that long before telescopes or observatories, there were eyes turned upward in wonder, and hands that sought to capture that wonder in stone. But the story deepens when we follow not only what the tablet shows, but where it was found. The region of Al-Nasim lies close to the paths once trodden by caravans, where trade moved between rivers and deserts, where merchants carried copper, tin, and wool. To uncover such an object there is to glimpse a crossroads, a place where knowledge too may have traveled. Could it be that the engraver was not alone in his vision? That the patterns of the sky carved upon the tablet were meant to be shared, carried from one settlement to another, a portable sky for those who moved beneath it. The stone, after all, is durable. Unlike clay, which shatters, or parchment which decays, it endures through centuries of burial. Perhaps that was the intention all along, to make something that would not vanish, a memory not of kings or wars, but of the sky itself. The Al-Nasim tablet also raises a quieter possibility, that it was never meant for the community at all, but for the individual. A personal object, a meditation, a map held in secret. There are no inscriptions naming its maker, no dedication to a temple or ruler. It is silent, anonymous. Perhaps it belonged to someone who simply loved the stars. Yet the silence of the object gives birth to countless voices. Some see in it an attempt at science, the earliest stirrings of astronomy. Others see ritual magic, stars as symbols to guide prayers. Still others imagine it as a child's learning tool, a simple chart to teach the constellations. None can be proved, and so the stone keeps its secrets, while speculation drifts endlessly around it. And so the Al-Nasim tablet rests today, displayed under careful light, its surface still faintly rough with the work of ancient tools. Visitors pass by, some lingering, some glancing only briefly. But for those who pause, there is a moment of recognition that even across thousands of years, even from hands long gone, there is a shared human gesture here. To look at the night sky, to see patterns, to feel the need to preserve them, to burn the stars into stone so that they might outlast the fleeting breath of one life. Time moves on, empires rise and fall, languages vanish, temples crumble, but the stars endure, and in their endurance, the Al-Nasim tablet holds its quiet place. It is not grand in size, nor dazzling with gold or jewels. It does not proclaim the might of rulers, or the victories of war. Instead, it whispers of a smaller, deeper mystery, that long ago, in the stillness of Mesopotamian night, someone chose to turn their eyes to the sky, and to leave behind a record of what they saw, and in doing so, they left a message not to kings or gods, but to us. The blithe intaglios, giants drawn into the desert floor. The desert opens with silence. A vast plain stretches in all directions, where sand, stone, and scrub blur into one another until the horizon itself seems uncertain. The air shimmers with heat by day, and with a cool, almost metallic stillness by night. It is here, not far from the Colorado River, in the arid lands of southeastern California, that one may stumble upon something that should not be here, and yet is. Lines etched into the very floor of the desert, so large, so vast, that only from above can their full form be seen. They are the blithe intaglios, giant figures pressed into the ground, their outlines carved into gravel and soil, long before the modern world imagined flight, long before satellites and aircraft revealed their secret shapes. They lie quietly beneath the sun, immense yet almost invisible from the ground, as though waiting not for those who walk the earth but for something or someone that could gaze upon them from the skies. From up close one might see only disturbed patches of soil, stones displaced and cleared, faint boundaries where darker rock gives way to lighter earth beneath. It would be easy to walk past them without noticing anything at all, but taken together, at scale, their presence emerges. A human form stretching hundreds of feet, arms extended, legs angled, torsos long and simple but unmistakably deliberate. Some appear to be men, others, animals, others, shapes less certain but no less intentional. The figures themselves are geoglyphs, designs made not by adding, but by removing. Those who created them scraped away the darker surface layer of desert pavement, those stones polished by centuries of wind and time, revealing the lighter soil beneath. The act was simple, yet the effect immense. With patience, with vision, they transformed the desert into a canvas, and the images they left remain, some measuring over 170 feet across. The question that hovers, calm yet insistent, is the same one whispered across deserts worldwide. Who made these forms, and why? For the blithe intaglios, no answer is simple. Archaeologists trace their creation to between 450 and 2,000 years ago, a span so wide it is less a pinpoint than a broad shadow across time. Some believe they were created by the ancestors of the Mojave or Kachan peoples, tribes who still carry stories of giants and spirits, of figures etched not to be seen by ordinary men, but by those above. Others suggest that they were ritual sites, places where dances and ceremonies aligned with myth were performed, the outlines in the ground a stage set for invisible audiences. What is most striking is their similarity to other geoglyphs across the world. The Nazca lines of Peru, famous and vast, depict animals and abstract patterns drawn across a desert plateau thousands of miles south. In England, chalk figures carved into hillsides stand as guardians from another age. In Kazakhstan, geometric geoglyphs of earth and stone spread across steppelands. And here, in California, in the harsh quiet of the desert, lie the blithe intaglios, as though humanity across continents and centuries has felt a shared impulse to draw on the earth itself, to etch messages not for the moment, but for eternity. The figures in Blythe are spread across several groups. The largest is of a human, arms outstretched, body elongated. Another appears to be an animal, perhaps a mountain lion, perhaps a horse, though the desert has seen neither in such form for centuries. A third may be a coiled serpent. Their meanings slip like mirages. Are they myth made into ground? Are they stories turned into stone? Imagine for a moment the people who might have stood here centuries ago. The desert air was the same, dry, thin, filled with heat by day and stars by night. The Colorado River flowed not far away, a lifeline of green in a sea of brown. Small groups gathered, tools in hand, beginning the patient work of clearing stones. They would not have seen the full form as they worked. On the ground, the figures are too vast to be understood. They must have trusted in memory, in instruction, in ritual guidance passed down from elders, that the shape would emerge when the work was complete. Perhaps they worked by starlight, guided by constellations overhead. Perhaps they sang as they walked, songs that carried the rhythm of movement, of scraping, of placing. The geoglyphs were not dug deep, not permanent in the way stone temples or carved statues are permanent. The desert itself was the medium, fragile, easy to erode, yet still they remain. That endurance is its own mystery. To stand here today is to feel both closeness and distance. The Blythe intaglios are fenced, protected now, yet they remain vulnerable. The marks are shallow, the earth fragile. They survived centuries of wind, of weather, of neglect. They were rediscovered in the 20th century, when a pilot flying overhead looked down and realized what had been beneath him all along. From that moment, they entered modern consciousness, not as new creations, but as reminders that the land itself holds memory. What strikes observers most is scale. One figure stretches more than 170 feet. That is larger than many modern buildings, larger than many ships, larger than the span of most human works that expect to be seen from ground level. Yet here they are, laid out in such vastness, without tools to measure from the sky, without vantage to see them in total. The makers worked blind to the whole, trusting the design itself, as if the act of creation was more important than the viewing. Some anthropologists suggest they were offerings to the Creator, or to sky beings, or to the sun. The Mojave tells stories of Mastamho, a creator god, who shaped the river, the animals, and the people. The large human figures could be Mastamho himself, their size echoing the immensity of myth. Others suggest they were tied to fertility rituals, or seasonal ceremonies. The figures danced upon, walked upon, their outlines alive with movement, and yet, the enigma remains. Why draw something no one on the ground can fully see? Why press shapes into the earth that only birds or gods could understand? In that question lies the quiet, almost haunting beauty of the Blythe intaglios. They are not answers, but gestures. They reach beyond ordinary life, beyond the need to be practical or seen. They are human expression elevated into mystery, art written not on parchment or canvas, but on the very skin of the world. At night the desert deepens, the wind falls, the stars reveal themselves in countless patterns overhead. It is here, under this dome of sky, that the figures gain their truest context. Perhaps they were meant as reflections of constellations, the earth mirroring the heavens. Perhaps those who carved them looked upward and sought to bring the shapes above into the soil below, binding sky and land together. The Blythe intaglios have no single interpretation. They are fragments of story without the story itself, pages without text. But perhaps that is their gift. To stand before them, or above them, is to feel a continuity with all who have ever looked upon mystery, and felt the pull of wonder, and still they endure. Quiet, immense, almost invisible unless sought. Giants lying in the desert floor, their bodies patient, their meaning suspended between past and present. They remind us that long before satellites and aerial surveys, long before maps and photographs, humans were already speaking to the sky, already shaping the earth into symbols of myth, faith, and the unknown. They remain because the desert allows it, because wind and rain here are soft, infrequent, gentle enough not to erase what was once pressed into the earth with care. They remain because memory clings to stone, and because, even without knowing the reason, humans have chosen to preserve them, to mark them, to fence them, to tell their story again, and so the desert holds them, as it has for centuries. The Blythe intaglios, vast, quiet, enduring, figures larger than life, larger than history, etched into a landscape where silence is its own language, and where mystery is not a puzzle to be solved, but a companion to be lived with. The desert floor does not answer. It does not explain. It simply holds the shapes and waits. The Starving of Saqqara, a stone carving that defies identity. There is a place just outside the shadows of the Great Pyramids where the sands of Egypt thin into pale ridges, and the wind sweeps through ruins left by thousands of years of footsteps. Among the temples and tombs, the golden limestone blocks, and the weather-worn causeways leading to forgotten chambers, lies an artifact unlike any other. It is not a towering obelisk, nor a painted sarcophagus, nor a glittering piece of treasure. It is simply a slab of stone. But on its surface, carved with careful lines and pressed shapes, there lingers an image that scholars have debated for more than a century. It is called the Starving of Saqqara. The name itself is misleading. Saqqara is an ancient necropolis, a vast burial ground where the nobility and officials of Egypt were laid to rest across dynasties. It is older than the pyramids of Giza, stretching back to the very dawn of Egyptian kingship. In Saqqara, archaeologists have uncovered mastabas, tombs, pyramids, and ceremonial temples that chart the rise and fall of Egypt's rulers. But the stone carving that came to be known as the Starving of Saqqara does not neatly fit into this world. It is not Egyptian in its style. It does not resemble the wall reliefs carved in the reigns of pharaohs. Instead, it seems to stand apart, foreign, ambiguous, perhaps even intrusive. On its rough surface are depicted figures, two human-like forms, skeletal in their proportions, with elongated skulls and hollowed eyes. Their bodies are thin, ribs drawn, limbs stretched almost too long. They do not look like the idealized figures of Egyptian wall art, where pharaohs and gods are presented with symmetry and poise. They do not carry the attributes of kingship. They are not adorned with crowns or staffs. Instead, they appear diminished, fragile, even pained. This image, carved perhaps 4,000 years ago or more, has haunted those who look upon it. Why were these figures carved? Who made them? And why, of all places, were they left in Saqqara, a sacred site bound tightly to Egypt's sense of eternity? These questions linger, unanswered, like whispers carried across the desert wind. The story of the Starving of Saqqara begins, as so many ancient tales do, with rediscovery. In the late 19th century, explorers and archaeologists were scouring Saqqara, uncovering tomb after tomb. Among the finds, this peculiar stone slab came into notice. Unlike the hieroglyphs that could be translated, or the familiar depictions of gods and funerary scenes, this carving resisted interpretation. It did not tell a story in the language of Egypt. Instead, it stared back, two strange beings etched into permanence. Scholars called it the Starving, for the figures seemed to be wasting away, their bellies hollow, their bones sharp beneath taut skin. But were they starving, or was something else being portrayed? Some suggested the figures might not represent hunger at all, but rather a condition, disease, deformity, or perhaps a symbolic rendering of outsiders. Their elongated heads have led some to compare them with practices of cranial deformation, a cultural custom found in various parts of the world. Could these figures represent a people once known to Egypt, now lost to history? Or were they symbolic, carved not to depict real humans, but to embody some mythological or spiritual force? The mystery only deepened when scholars compared the carving style to known Egyptian art. Egyptian reliefs are orderly, measured, proportionate, almost mathematical in their precision. The Starving of Saqqara is none of these. Its lines are rough, its forms exaggerated. It seems closer to the art of sub-Saharan Africa, or even the Levant. Some have argued that it may not have been Egyptian at all, but rather brought to Saqqara from elsewhere, perhaps as spoils, perhaps as tribute, perhaps even as an object of reverence. Yet there it was, lying in the heart of Egypt's most sacred necropolis, as though it belonged. Imagine the scene thousands of years ago. Saqqara was not a quiet ruin then, but a place alive with priests and workers. The Step Pyramid of Dusur, Egypt's earliest pyramid, stood as a marvel of engineering, its limestone gleaming in the sunlight. Processions of priests in white linen carried offerings, while mourners left goods for the afterlife. The air would have carried the sound of chants, the smell of incense, the shuffle of sandals across stone, and somewhere within this vast ritual landscape, this mysterious carving was placed. Was it hidden in a tomb? Was it displayed in a temple? Was it tucked away in a corner where few could see it? We do not know, but somehow, it remained, waiting for the modern gaze to find it again. The elongated skulls have drawn the most attention. In Egypt, depictions of heads are typically consistent, rounded, stylized, adorned with wigs or headdresses. But these figures' skulls taper back, giving them an almost otherworldly quality. This has led to countless speculations, from the scholarly to the fantastical. Some suggest it depicts Nubians, or other African peoples known to Egypt, groups who may have practiced cranial modification. Others lean into the realm of mystery, imagining that the carving hints at beings beyond human visitors, perhaps, or mythological entities. Of course, archaeology deals in evidence, not speculation, and yet, the starving of Saqqara resists evidence. There is no inscription to identify its maker, no context in which it was definitively found, no accompanying text to explain its meaning. All we have is the image, the silent figures staring outward across millennia. The very ambiguity of the carving has made it a canvas for imagination. Some see in it a story of famine, perhaps commemorating a period when Egypt or its neighbors suffered drought. Others see it as an allegory of death itself, the withering of the body, the fragility of life before eternity. Still others believe it may represent captives, people taken in war, reduced and humiliated, their suffering immortalized in stone. And then there are those who wonder if the carving might be older than Egypt itself. Saqqara was used as a necropolis for thousands of years. Could it be that this slab was placed there from an even earlier culture, predating the pharaohs? If so, then the starving of Saqqara may not just puzzle us because it is unusual. It may puzzle us because it does not belong to Egypt at all, but to a forgotten world that came before. As night falls over the desert, and the stars wheel overhead, the imagination drifts further. Picture the artisans who carved it, chipping into stone with crude tools, their vision taking shape. Did they see themselves in these elongated forms? Did they imagine spirits, ancestors, gods? Did they leave behind this slab as a marker of memory, or as a warning, or simply as art? The questions swirl, unanchored. Over the decades, the carving has moved from obscurity to fascination, passing through museums, studied by Egyptologists, anthropologists, and even those outside academia who are drawn to the inexplicable. Its enduring mystery lies not only in what it shows, but in how it resists being fixed to one story. Unlike hieroglyphs, which can be read and decoded, the starving of Saqqara remains mute, a riddle cut into stone. And so, in the heart of Egypt's necropolis, it continues to stand apart, a fragment of something that does not fully belong, but cannot be dismissed. Its hollow eyes and strange skulls continue to look back at us, asking questions we may never answer. Perhaps that is its purpose, not to tell us what it is, but to remind us of what we do not know. That even in the land of Egypt, where kings recorded their every triumph, and artisans filled walls with stories, there are still silences, deep, unsettling silences that echo through time, and in that silence, the figures remain, thin, fragile, timeless. The starving of Saqqara. The Kensington Runestone. Norse words carved before Columbus. Beneath the canopy of elm and oak in a quiet stretch of Minnesota countryside, there lies a stone that refuses to keep silent. It was discovered more than a century ago, pulled from the earth where it had been resting, tangled in roots and soil. On its weathered face are lines of runes, carved symbols of the Norse alphabet, etched deep and steady, as if made by hands that knew well what they were doing. At first glance it seems impossible. The stone rests in the heartland of America, thousands of miles and oceans away from Scandinavia, where such letters were born. The carving reads like a tale of exploration, hardship and tragedy. Yet the very existence of this artifact has troubled scholars, stirred communities, and ignited debates that burn as brightly today as they did when it was first lifted from the ground in 1898. This is the Kensington Runestone, an object perched precariously between history and legend, reality and forgery, discovery and hoax, and to wander through its story is to walk the blurred border between what we think we know of the past and what might yet be hiding beneath the soil of forgotten fields. The story begins on a farm. Olof Oneman, a Swedish immigrant, was clearing land near Kensington, Minnesota. The year was 1898. His axe bit into roots, his spade struck against stone, and there it was, a slab of greywacke, heavy and unyielding, bound within the roots of a poplar tree. Olof at first thought it was nothing but another stubborn obstacle, but when the dirt was brushed away, letters revealed themselves, cut into the stone with striking precision. Imagine that moment, the farmer kneeling, fingertips tracing grooves that formed a script older than the English tongue, older than the land he now worked. He recognized them not fully, but enough. Runes, the symbols of his ancestral homeland. His neighbors, too, gathered to see, muttering and wondering if fate had led them to a relic that might prove their distant kin had stood on this very soil centuries before Columbus. The inscription told a story. Its lines, once translated, spoke of 8 Gotlanders and 22 Norwegians journeying through the land in 1362, westward, across rivers and lakes, far from the seas they once knew. They had left 10 men dead, blood staining the land, while the others camped by the water. Their grief was cut into stone, a memorial carved with a blunt plea, "Remember us." If true, the stone was earth-shattering. It would mean Norsemen had not only touched the coast of America, as the sagas suggested with Vinland, but had pressed deep inland centuries before Columbus. Yet doubt, too, sprouted swiftly. From the moment of its discovery, the Kensington runestone was tugged into controversy. Was it authentic, or had it been a prank, perhaps even a forgery meant to entertain or deceive? Scholars began their debates with sharp edges, accusing, countering, weighing evidence, never arriving at consensus. The stone itself bears its silence. Grey whack, a hard stone, keeps its carvings well, and the grooves are neither crude nor careless. The letters are shaped in runic script, but some forms appear unfamiliar, resembling characters thought to have been in use much later than the 14th century. Critics seized upon this, claiming no medieval traveler could have carved such symbols, that the blend of runes betrayed a modern hand, and yet defenders argued the runic alphabet evolved in scattered, regional ways. Variants existed, some obscure, some forgotten. Could it not be that an isolated band of explorers, far from home, carved with the forms they knew, however unusual to later eyes? What complicates matters further is the sheer weight of the inscription itself. It is long, nearly 30 words. A prankster, one might say, could scratch a few symbols, but to carve such a lengthy, coherent inscription in stone is no small task. It requires time, skill, tools, and knowledge of the runes. Could Olaf, a humble farmer, or anyone in his circle, have created it with such expertise? The arguments tangle endlessly. But let us step away from modern quarrels and imagine instead what the stone itself suggests. A party of Norse travelers, sailing west, their longships cutting across the Atlantic. Perhaps they set out from Greenland, where Norse colonies still clung precariously to survival in the 14th century. The seas were harsh, ice creeping ever further south, famine haunting the settlements. Perhaps a group, desperate or daring, pushed further, chasing whispers of land beyond the horizon. The sagas tell of Vinland, a fertile place, rich with grapes and timber. Archaeology has confirmed that Norse once settled briefly at Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland, around the year 100,000. Could these men of the 14th century have followed similar paths? Down rivers, across the Great Lakes, venturing deeper into a continent none of their kin had mapped. Picture them trudging through forests thick and endless, the weight of provisions dwindling, the maps in their heads drawn only in memory. Their beards long, clothes patched, eyes set against the unknown. They lose companions. 10 men dead, it says, by blood and violence. Who were their enemies? Disease, starvation, or perhaps clashes with indigenous peoples who saw them not as explorers but intruders. The survivors, weary and grief-stricken, carve their message into stone. The act itself is telling. Why carve such words in the heart of unfamiliar land? Perhaps they hoped their kin might one day retrace their steps, stumble upon this very marker, and know what befell them. A gravestone not for one body, but for a whole expedition. A cry into eternity. We were here. And then silence. The centuries passed. The stone lay hidden beneath roots. Poplars grew and fell. Snow melted. Soil shifted. Whatever survivors remained, if any, vanished into history. Until Olaf's axe bit down, and the earth gave up its secret once again. Debates followed like thunderclouds. Some philologists claimed the grammar of the inscription showed modern influence, the language not medieval but closer to 19th century Swedish. Others countered that dialects shifted, that rural tongues carried echoes older than city scholars realized. Geologists examined the weathering of the grooves. Some swore they were centuries old. Others insisted the cuts were too fresh. Each expert seemed to find only what they sought. Those who wished the stone true found authenticity in every line. Those who doubted saw forgery in every curve. Yet outside the halls of academia, the stone lived another life. It became part of local identity. Minnesotans of Scandinavian descent embraced it, seeing in its tale a proud link between their old world and new. Museums displayed it. Tourists marveled at it. Writers spun stories. Historians wrestled, and the stone, unmoving, endured it all. Even today, its grooves remain sharp. The runes stare out with the same patient silence, neither confirming nor denying, waiting for interpretations to rise and fall like tides. The truth may never be known. If genuine, the Kensington runestone rewrites chapters of American history, proving Norsemen ventured far deeper into the continent than once believed. If false, it remains a remarkable artifact of another kind, a symbol of longing, the way immigrant communities wove their identities into the soil of new lands. For even as a forgery, it speaks of a need to belong, to tie old sagas to new homesteads, to etch ancestry into earth. The stone rests now in a museum, its surface preserved, its mystery intact. People stand before it, eyes drawn to its letters, and wonder, could Norse explorers really have camped upon these prairies centuries before the world acknowledged Columbus? Or is it all the dream of men who wanted their roots to run deeper into American soil? Walk past it, and the air seems to hum faintly, as if voices whisper through the runes. 8 Gotlanders and 22 Norwegians, far from home, carving their grief, asking to be remembered. A farmer, centuries later, digging through roots, lifting history from the ground. Scholars, townsfolk, wanderers, all standing in the shadow of a stone that refuses to let the past rest quietly. Whether authentic or forged, the Kensington runestone holds power, not only as an object of stone but as a mirror. It reflects our hunger to know where we came from, to grasp stories that bind us to the land, to believe in journeys that stretch further than the maps. It is the silence of the stone that keeps it alive. For silence, when carved with symbols, speaks longer than any voice. The Sri Lanka meteorite fossils. Life found beyond Earth. Imagine a quiet evening sky over Sri Lanka. The warm air carrying the faint hum of cicadas, the palm fronds shifting with a slow rhythm, and the stars beginning to pierce through the velvet dark above. In such a sky, it feels as though anything might arrive, lightning from a summer storm, a distant bird wheeling into its roost, or something far stranger, something not born of the earth itself. It was in the year 2012 that the quiet skies above Sri Lanka gave way to such a mystery. A meteorite fell, its entry so subtle that many never noticed, yet its landing would spark questions that ripple far beyond the island. Fragments of this spaceborne stone were collected, small and grayish pieces with nothing outwardly remarkable about them, at least to the casual eye. But within those unassuming fragments, something was seen that seemed to turn the ground beneath human certainty into shifting sand. For when scientists peered into the structure of this meteorite, they claimed to see filaments, patterns, and even tiny structures that bore a resemblance to life. Fossilized forms, they suggested. Microscopic remains of something biological, carried not from Earth but from the deep vault of space itself. To those who studied them, the meteorite was no longer merely stone. It was a message, written not in words but in forms, whispering the oldest of questions. Are we alone? Or has life, like starlight, drifted between worlds, waiting for chance collisions to plant its seed? The Sri Lanka meteorite, sometimes called the Polonnaruwa meteorite, soon became an object of wonder and contention alike. Its story is one of cosmic curiosity, but also of human doubt. Some hailed it as the strongest evidence yet that panspermia, the idea that life travels through the cosmos on comets, asteroids, and meteorites, might be true. Others dismissed it as a mistake, or even a misinterpretation of earthly contamination. And yet the images of the strange filaments persisted, sparking imagination in the minds of those who saw them. Think of what it means to imagine a fossil that did not grow beneath Earth's oceans, did not arise from the ancient swamps or warm tide pools, but instead rode silently across the gulfs between planets, perhaps for millions of years, only to land here, in the humid fields of Sri Lanka. A fossil not of this world, but of the cosmos itself. As you listen, picture yourself holding such a fragment in your palm. It is small, perhaps no larger than a coin, with a rough surface that crumbles slightly under touch. Nothing about it betrays its mystery at first glance. But within its structure, beyond the reach of your eye, there may rest the trace of something that lived, breathed, and perished long before Earth ever spun its first cycle around the sun. Something alien, yet familiar. The story of these meteorite fossils invites us to wander deeper into time and space. Consider how many rocks fall to Earth each year, unnoticed, blending into soil, dismissed as common stone. And yet, every so often, one is picked up, split open, and studied. Some reveal tiny mineral grains older than our sun. Some reveal carbon, hinting at chemical recipes for life. And some, like the Polonnaruwa meteorite, reveal shapes that resemble the architectures of biology, structures so delicate they look like ghosts of cells. To those who believe, the Sri Lanka fossils are part of a greater pattern. For decades, certain meteorites have been reported to contain odd organic features. In the 1960s, scientists argued over the Orgueil meteorite in France, which appeared to hold filaments that looked biological. Later, in the 1990s, a Martian meteorite, named ALH 8401, was said to contain microscopic fossils, igniting debates that reached even into politics and presidential speeches. The Sri Lanka meteorite, then, is a continuation of this thread, a reminder that the boundary between chemistry and life is thinner than we might think, and yet skepticism remains. Critics point out that samples can be easily contaminated by earthly life, that strange mineral structures can mimic the appearance of biology, and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Perhaps, they say, the Sri Lanka meteorite carried nothing but stone, and its supposed fossils were illusions of the microscope. Perhaps. But if so, why do the shapes linger in the imagination? Why do they feel like whispers of a possibility too large to dismiss? Now, drift with me further. Imagine that life indeed can ride across the cosmos, hitching passage on meteors. Imagine seeds of cells frozen within ice and rock, traveling for eons in the cold vacuum, shielded from radiation by their mineral shells. Some perish, many perish, but a few survive, dormant, waiting. When their host stone collides with a planet, ours, or another, they wake. They mingle with native chemistry, they spark new beginnings. In this way, life is not bound to a single world, but becomes a traveler, spreading like fire across the stars. If the Sri Lanka meteorite truly carries such fossils, then it is a page torn from this cosmic story, a page that fell quietly into a field, overlooked until curiosity cracked it open. It is easy to think of Earth as isolated, as singular, but the meteorite asks us to imagine otherwise. It asks us to see the sky, not as a barrier, but as a highway of stone and dust, carrying more than just debris, carrying perhaps the memory of lives from elsewhere. There is a strange comfort in this idea, for if life can travel across the universe, then we are not an accident, confined to one fragile planet. We are part of something older, wider, and unbroken. Life is not local, it is universal, woven into the very grain of existence. The fossils, real or mistaken, carry this suggestion like a lullaby, whispered across aeons. And so, in Sri Lanka, in that humid air heavy with the scent of rain and earth, a stone rests, holding a mystery. Some dismiss it, some guard it, and some dream about it. Its surface is silent, its core is unyielding. Yet within, perhaps, there is a map of biology written before Earth knew life. A map drawn not in ink, but in the delicate remains of creatures whose world no longer exists, whose journey ended in a fall through our atmosphere. As you sink deeper into thought, let your mind wander further outward, past the stars you know, past the edge of our galaxy, into the dark. Imagine countless other stones drifting, each with their secrets, each perhaps carrying a fossil too small to see, but too vast in implication to ignore. The cosmos is not empty, it is littered with these messengers, these fragments of forgotten worlds. The Sri Lanka meteorite is but one such messenger, cracked open for human eyes to question. Whether or not it truly holds alien fossils may never be answered to everyone's satisfaction. But perhaps its true gift lies not in certainty, but in wonder. It teaches us to look at every stone differently, to see in every fragment of the sky a chance for story, for connection, for the possibility that life is not unique but shared. And so, the tale lingers. A fall in 2012, a handful of fragments, a claim of fossils. Scientists debate, critics dismiss, dreamers dream. The stone remains silent, its secrets locked within, its meaning stretching far beyond Sri Lanka, into the expanse where stars are born and worlds collide. And in the silence, the question persists. Did we hold in our hand a piece of life from beyond Earth, or only a mirror reflecting back our own yearning to not be alone? Let the thought drift with you, softly now, like the meteorite itself gliding through endless night before its fall. It carries you gently, slowly, into the vastness, where the answers are not fixed but fluid, like stars shimmering on water. Perhaps the fossils are real, perhaps they are not, but in either case, they remind us of something profound. That mystery itself is a kind of life, moving from mind to mind, surviving through imagination, refusing extinction. The Sri Lanka meteorite may be a relic of deep space, or simply of deep curiosity. Either way, its story endures, and in listening, in wondering, you too are part of that endurance. The cosmos has given you a question. What you do with it, whether you chase it, doubt it, or let it rock you gently into sleep, is entirely your own. The Seven Sleepers Cave, skeletons of timeless rest. The road to the cave is quiet. It always has been. Whether one imagines it in the heat of the Anatolian summer, when the hills of central Turkey glow with a pale dry dust, or in the cool of spring, when the almond blossoms scatter petals across the pathways, the journey toward the place known as the Cave of the Seven Sleepers feels less like travel and more like slow descent into another time. The air grows still, the world grows muted, and each step begins to carry the weight of centuries. This cave, set into the side of a hill near the city of Ephesus, is more than stone. It is more than shadow and earth. To step near it is to wander into a story that has lingered in human memory for more than 1,000 years. A story so widely told that it appears in the sacred texts of both Christianity and Islam, carried across cultures and languages, shaping the way entire peoples understood the meaning of time, death, and the possibility of miracles. It is the story of youths who fell asleep, not for a night, not for a season, but for centuries. And when they woke, the world was no longer the one they had known. Archaeologists today still climb to the cave, brushing sand from inscriptions, measuring stones, trying to understand how myth and material once overlapped here. Within its quiet hollows, they have found skeletons, burial niches, and strange carved marks, layered traces of devotion that stretch back more than a millennium. The cave does not so much explain the legend as amplify it, filling silence with a kind of echo that draws listeners into a contemplative trance. The legend itself begins in persecution. The early centuries of the Common Era, when Christianity had not yet spread fully across the Roman world, were marked by suspicion. In Ephesus, as in many cities, those who embraced the new faith found themselves hunted. A group of young men, often said to be 7 in number though some accounts vary, refused to renounce their belief. They sought refuge, wandering away from the bustle of Ephesus and into the wild edges of its surrounding hills. There, they found the cave. What happened next is told with slight differences depending on who recounts it. Some say they prayed within, laying their heads down in exhaustion and falling into a miraculous sleep. Others tell that the emperor himself sealed the entrance, intending to starve them, and unknowingly preserved them for centuries of slumber. However the detail shifts, the core remains. They slept beyond any measure of ordinary time. Centuries later, the cave was opened. Light fell upon the sleepers, who stirred and rose, believing only a day had passed. One was sent into the city to buy bread, but as he laid out the coins he carried, confusion spread. These coins were relics of an earlier empire, no longer in use. The people of Ephesus gathered, astonished, and the sleepers realized that the world they had known was gone. Time had folded over itself. Centuries turned to moments. The Cave of the 7 Sleepers is not merely a myth lodged in scripture. It is also a site etched into the landscape, and in its stone chambers, archaeologists have discovered remains, skeletons interred, niches carved into the walls, and fragments of devotion. The place had become, in later centuries, a shrine. Pilgrims journeyed here, believing they walked into sacred ground where the boundary between life and death, waking and sleeping, was thinner than anywhere else. In Islamic tradition, the story is preserved in Surah Al-Kahf of the Quran. Here too, the tale is one of youths who took shelter from persecution, placed into sleep by God for centuries, their eventual waking a sign of divine power. In both traditions, the message resonates: time belongs not to emperors nor to kingdoms, but to something greater. Human certainty about life and death is not absolute. Inside the cave today, silence dominates. The chambers are rough, not carved for grandeur, but shaped by natural formation and the slow chiseling of adaptation. In the dimness, archaeologists noted places where lamps once burned, where hands traced marks upon the stone, where bones were carefully set to rest. Each detail is evidence that for centuries after the legend spread, people believed this place to be touched by mystery. The skeletons found there do not line up neatly with the story. They are not all youthful. Some belong to later pilgrims, buried within the sacred hollow to be close to the miracle of the sleepers. Others seem older still. This overlap of bones and legend is what makes archaeology here both fascinating and elusive. The cave became a layered archive of devotion, of myth, of the very human yearning for time to pause and for death to be softened into something gentler, something like sleep. Imagine for a moment standing at the entrance at dawn, the valley below still hazy, the air not yet disturbed by footsteps or voices. The city of Ephesus lies in ruins now, its marble streets broken, its grand theater empty, its once bustling port filled with silt. Yet above, the cave remains. You step inside. The air is cooler here, heavy with a dryness that preserves stone and bone alike. You pause, your eyes adjusting. Along the walls, niches appear like shadows within shadows, cut carefully into the rock. You feel the weight of centuries pressing in, and you sense the quiet breathing of stories told for so long that they seem to become part of the earth itself. One could spend hours here tracing the variations of the legend. In some accounts, the sleepers number not 7 but 8, the 8th being a faithful dog who kept watch. In others, their names change, adapted to local languages. Yet always the core remains, young men fleeing oppression, granted refuge not just from soldiers but from time itself. Sleep is salvation. Sleep is miracle. The cave does not resist the story, it welcomes it. Stone, after all, is the perfect keeper of silence. Where written words can be lost, where cities can crumble, stone holds the hush of centuries, allowing imagination to swell into the gaps. When pilgrims entered, they must have felt this too. They must have seen the uneven walls as proof, the dry chambers as vessels for something beyond comprehension. There are other caves across the world tied to versions of this legend. In Jordan, near Amman, another site claims the story. In Syria too, similar traditions exist. This spread itself tells us something. The legend was never simply about a location. It was about the human longing for time to yield, for faith to be vindicated beyond the tyranny of kings. Wherever the story traveled, caves became symbols of shelter and transformation. Yet in Ephesus, the tale found stone to anchor it most firmly. To wander further into the cave's chambers is to feel the narrowing of the world. Light fades, the ground is uneven. Here and there, archaeologists marked where burials had been disturbed by later visitors, where offerings once rested, a chipped lamp fragment, a coin left behind, a cross scratched faintly into stone. These are not the artifacts of a single moment, but of centuries of return. The cave became a palimpsest, each generation adding its belief, its layer of presence. Why does the legend endure? Perhaps because it offers comfort, to sleep without fear, to wake into a world made better. That is a dream carried in every culture. Or perhaps because it confounds the one thing humans cannot master: time. The sleepers did not die, nor did they live in the usual sense. They stepped outside the flow, and when they returned, they proved that the world is wider than emperors imagine. As evening falls around the cave, shadows stretch long. The wind gathers faintly at the entrance, carrying scents of dust and wild herbs. The silence inside seems deeper, as though the earth itself is remembering. You imagine the sleepers lying still, centuries collapsing into a single heartbeat, and you begin to understand why so many pilgrims believed. Not because bones alone convinced them, nor stone carvings, but because the cave's silence itself whispered of mysteries beyond comprehension. Archaeology can map the bones, history can trace the legend's spread, but neither can entirely dissolve the quiet power of the cave. Standing here, you do not need proof. You only need to listen, to breathe in the stillness, to feel the strangeness of a world where time might bend, and where sleep might not be an end, but a passageway into another kind of dawn. The Cave of the Seven Sleepers waits still, cradled in the Anatolian hills. It holds not only skeletons, not only stone, but also the echo of a story that refuses to fade. A story that teaches that rest can be miraculous, that silence can be eternal, and that even in the deepest darkness of persecution, hope may take the shape of sleep. And as you step back into the night, leaving the cave behind, you carry with you the strange comfort that those long-ago sleepers offered. That time itself is not always what it seems, that rest can stretch beyond measure, that waking may yet come in a gentler world. The Mayan codices, books that shouldn't have survived the flames. The jungle at dusk holds a silence unlike any other. It is not truly silence, of course, but a quiet layered with small living sounds, the rustle of palm fronds shifting in a wind that drifts low and humid, the faint call of night birds settling themselves in the canopy, the distant chatter of unseen monkeys swinging far above. Beneath that green roof of tangled branches and woven leaves, shadows deepen into blues and purples, and the ground exhales the dampness of centuries. It was in such landscapes that the ancient Maya once walked, carrying in their hands the most fragile treasures of their world, books, painted in black and red upon folded sheets of bark. They called these living objects codices. They were light to carry but heavy with meaning, and the astonishing thing is not that they were once made, but that a few of them, against all odds, against fire and war and centuries of decay, still remain. Most did not. In the middle of the 16th century, a Spanish friar named Diego de Landa stood in the square of Mani, in the Yucatan, and ordered the burning of books, not ordinary books, but the folded bark manuscripts of the Maya, filled with glyphs and images, maps of stars, calendars, lists of rituals, the breathing knowledge of a civilization. To him they were works of the devil, filled with superstition. To the Maya, they were memory itself. The fire swallowed hundreds, perhaps thousands, in one long day of smoke and heat. And yet, 4 are known to have survived. 4 slender voices whispering out of a chorus that was silenced. The Dresden Codex, the Madrid Codex, the Paris Codex, and the Grolier Codex. Each carries mysteries inside it. Each has passed through centuries of peril. Each is a reminder that not everything can be erased. But before we linger with them, imagine what it meant for the Maya to make these books in the first place. Picture a craftsman in a city of stone temples and whitewashed plazas, smoothing the inner bark of a wild fig tree, softening it, pressing it flat. The sheets were coated with lime plaster until they shone pale and smooth, ready for paint. Then came the brush. Stiff bristles dipped into black ink made from soot and resin, red ink drawn from hematite or cochineal. Line by line, glyphs bloomed across the page. Not words in the sense we know them, but complex signs, part picture, part sound, part idea. A single glyph could mean a syllable, or a concept, or both at once. The page unfolded like a screen, each panel opening into the next. The result was more than writing, it was a weaving of time itself. Calendars unrolled across the surface, showing the cycles of days and gods, Venus rising and falling, eclipses, sacred rituals bound to moments that would return again and again, long after the scribes themselves were gone. Now, centuries later, the codices that remain sit in glass cases in quiet museums far from the humid forests where they were first painted. The Dresden Codex rests in a German library, its pages filled with intricate astronomical tables. The Madrid Codex hides in Spain, sprawling across more than 100 pages. The Paris Codex lies deep in the Bibliothèque Nationale, faded but stubborn, and the Grolier Codex, once doubted, now largely believed to be authentic, sits in Mexico itself, its rough pages holding an ancient voice that almost slipped away. Each one is incomplete, each one bears scars of time, but together they hold fragments of a vast system of thought. Imagine unrolling the Dresden Codex. The pages unfold like a concertina, stretching across the table in a long painted strip. At first glance, you see figures, gods with elaborate headdresses, serpents curling through space, glyphs stacked in neat rows. Look closer, and patterns emerge. Tables of numbers, calculations of days, predictions of lunar eclipses stretching centuries into the future. This was not merely ritual decoration, it was science, precise and careful. The Maya tracked Venus with a devotion that seems almost obsessive, noting the planet's rising and disappearance, its cycles repeating every 584 days. In their worldview, Venus was no mere light in the sky. It was a god, a bringer of war, a marker of fate. To know its movements was to prepare for what would come. Now, picture this book traveling across oceans. How did it survive? It is thought that the Dresden Codex left the Americas in the hands of a conquistador or a friar, tucked into luggage, carried across the sea. For years it lay unnoticed, until at last it found its way into a royal collection, and eventually into the library where scholars opened its pages in wonder. The Madrid Codex, larger and more chaotic, is different. Its pages hold rituals of divination, daily ceremonies, agricultural instructions. Here the scribes painted not only gods but people, masks, drums, offerings, the small details of life bound to sacred time. This was a book not only for astronomers, but for priests guiding communities through the weave of days. The Paris Codex is thinner, its paint fading, but in its pages linger traces of prophecy, the signs of world ages turning, the cycle of Katuns, 20-year periods of fate, each ending and beginning marked with omens, gods presiding over destruction and renewal. For the Maya, time did not march forward into an endless line. It circled, like the orbit of Venus, like the seasons, like breath. What has been will be again. And then, the Grolier Codex, found in a cave in the 20th century, its authenticity doubted for decades. Some said it was a forgery, a clever trick made to fool collectors, but deeper studies, radiocarbon tests, pigment analysis, these turned suspicion into belief. Today, most scholars accept that it is genuine, an artifact of the late post-classic era. Its pages are rougher, simpler, its gods stark, painted with fewer details, but they still breathe the rhythm of the sacred calendar. 4 voices, out of hundreds, out of thousands. When you close your eyes, you can almost imagine what was lost. Entire libraries of folded bark books, stored in the cool chambers of temples, shelves of painted knowledge, histories of dynasties, records of trade, medical knowledge, maps of stars, all gone in an afternoon of fire. The smoke rising, pages curling, the air filled with the smell of burning bark and plaster. The friar who ordered it believed he was saving souls. Instead, he destroyed centuries of memory. And yet, memory cannot be so easily silenced. The codices that remain are fragments, but they carry echoes of the whole. Through them, scholars have glimpsed the astonishing sophistication of Maya thought. They calculated eclipses with accuracy rivaling that of modern astronomers. They tracked Venus and Mars. They recorded rituals aligned with these cycles. Their calendar systems interlocked in patterns so intricate that modern minds still puzzle over them. But what is most haunting is not only what the codices reveal, but what they do not. The gaps, the silences, the missing voices. We know of rituals without knowing their meaning. We see gods whose names are half forgotten. We read numbers whose purposes are unclear. It is like hearing a melody with most of its notes erased, and yet there is beauty in that incompleteness. The codices whisper more than they declare. They remind us that the past is never fully grasped, only approached. That knowledge, even half lost, can endure. Night settles deeper in the imagined jungle. Stars appear, one by one, in the clear gaps of sky above the canopy. Perhaps you lift your eyes as the ancient Maya once did, searching for Venus, bright and sharp against the horizon. Imagine holding a folded book of bark in your hands, painted with careful lines that tell you not only where Venus will be tonight, but where it will rise centuries hence. Imagine turning the page, the rustle of bark and plaster, and seeing the gods themselves depicted, watching, waiting, forever tied to the cycles of the heavens. These books should not have survived, and yet they did. Part 1 drifts to its close here, not with an ending, but with a pause. The story continues, because the codices themselves continue. Through centuries of silence, through fire and loss, through the hands of collectors and scholars, through the eyes of those who still gaze upon them with wonder. They are not only artifacts, they are time folded into pages, waiting to be opened again. The flicker of fire is not always destruction. Sometimes it is a reminder that what survives through flame gains a second life. When we left the story of the Mayan codices, the fragile books of painted bark, they had already endured both centuries of devotion and the brutal moments of attempted annihilation. Yet even now, in our modern world, their pages continue to whisper, and their images continue to speak in ways that historians, archaeologists, and dreamers alike have barely begun to comprehend. Let us return to that stillness, to the quiet of a humid night in the Yucatan, where cicadas drone endlessly, and where the faint silhouettes of pyramids rise against the stars. Imagine yourself walking, slowly and without hurry, toward the place where the shadows of these ancient books still reside. This is not a rush of discovery, but a drifting, almost like water flowing through stone channels carved centuries ago. The Mayan codices, the Dresden, the Madrid, the Paris, and the Grolier, stand not just as artifacts but as survivors, each marked by centuries of peril. Their journeys were long, sometimes uncertain, sometimes miraculous. The Dresden Codex, perhaps the most famous, crossed the ocean under mysterious circumstances. Some say conquistadors carried it as a curiosity, not fully grasping its weight. Others imagine friars drawn in spite of themselves to the intricacy of its designs, keeping it hidden from the fires that consumed so many of its companions. It eventually surfaced in Germany, its pages studied under candlelight by scholars who could only guess at its meaning. For them it was a puzzle without a key, a riddle painted in strange signs of gods and serpents. And yet, through centuries of upheaval, the book endured. Even when Dresden itself was reduced to ashes during the Second World War, this fragile object of bark and pigment survived. That alone feels like a miracle, a voice from a lost world carried across continents and centuries, protected from destruction again and again. Within its pages lies a vision of time unlike anything in the West. The Maya measured existence in vast cycles that tied human life to the stars. Venus, the morning and evening star, was charted with exacting precision. Its appearance is believed to herald moments of destiny, wars, harvests, sacrifices. Eclipses, too, were written into these books, darkening the sun and moon not only in the sky but in painted tables that aligned heaven's rhythm with human ritual. To read such a page is to encounter more than knowledge. It is to step into a universe collapsed into painted bark. Yet the codices were never only calendars. They were stories, too, of gods who moved through every season of life. The feathered serpent Kukulkan winds through their pages, the maize god emerges from the earth to nourish, and Chak the rainbringer pours endless water from his jars. His image repeats, assuring that rain is not an accident, but a cycle woven into eternity. Death gods grin from other pages, skeletal forms curling smoke from their mouths, warnings that life's fertility always shares its shadow with decay. In the torchlit halls of Mayan cities, keepers of the codices would unfurl these books slowly, their voices chanting glyphs aloud, their fingers tracing divine stories. To those gathered, the gods stirred in the firelight, speaking not through visions but through painted words. These books were not objects. They were bridges between the world of human beings and the eternal powers beyond. The Madrid Codex carries its own mystery. Unlike the Dresden, it was not preserved whole. Hidden, forgotten, fragmented, it drifted in obscurity before parts of it emerged again. Its pages feel closer to daily life, agriculture, weaving, hunting, yet always with gods present, watching, blessing, or warning. One can almost imagine the anonymous hands that tucked it away, preserving it without perhaps knowing exactly what it meant, but sensing that it was too heavy with spirit to be discarded. And always, behind these scattered survivals, the memory of flame returns. In 1562, Bishop Diego de Landa commanded piles of codices to be burned, their bark paper curling into smoke under the tropical sky. Centuries of knowledge vanished in a single gesture, the air filled with the voices of books undone. Yet paradoxically, de Landa himself recorded pieces of Mayan script in his writings, which later helped scholars decode the remnants he had sought to silence. History so often twists this way, a destroyer, becoming also an unwilling preserver. What survived of the codices now carries a weight that is almost unbearable. They are not simply 4 books. They are the final echoes of hundreds, perhaps thousands, that once existed. Each page that remains is surrounded by silence, each line made louder by the absence of what was lost. Today, under modern eyes, their mysteries continue to open in ways even the Maya could not have foreseen. Technologies reveal faded pigments, faint details invisible to the naked eye. Computers rebuild calendars, showing us with clarity that Mayan astronomy was not only precise, but often astonishing in its reach. Yet for all the science, there is something deeper, something that remains elusive, as if the codices still belong more to the realm of myth than of history. They are diagrams, yes, but they are also prayers. They are mathematics, but also invocations. Even translated, they resist full capture, their strangeness intact. Picture yourself now in a dimly lit museum hall, standing before the Dresden Codex itself. Under glass, fragile folds of bark are painted with colors that still breathe after so many centuries. Red, yellow, black, lines drawn with care by hands long gone. You lean closer, and for a moment, the centuries collapse. The pulse of those hands is still there, faint but undeniable. The voices of priests and keepers hum low in the silence. These books should not exist, they should have perished entirely, and yet they are here, carrying entire worlds into the present. The Mayan codices remind us of two truths: that human beings can destroy almost everything, and that even in destruction, fragments sometimes endure, holding the weight of entire worlds in their survival. What lives, through fire, through oceans, through centuries of neglect, becomes more than artifact, it becomes witness. So as we drift away from these fragile books, imagine once more the brush of a scribe painting glyphs under torchlight, the chant of priests aligning human time with the stars, the smoke rising from flames that consumed countless other volumes. And finally, imagine the handful that endured, waiting quietly through centuries, patient as stone, until you were ready to listen. Their survival is improbable. Their meaning is eternal. Thank you for watching Timeless Secrets. If you enjoyed this journey through history's mysteries, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. It really helps us keep uncovering the past. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Until next time, stay curious.